Dead America. Tales from the Outer Banks. Officer Bowman by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Day 0, 7:15 p.m. The last sliver of daylight hung in the air as Officer Bowman sat in his patrol car, which idled in the drive-thru of one of his favorite local eateries. The aroma of fried seafood and hush puppies filled the vehicle, making his stomach growl in anticipation. After a long shift of responding to tourist complaints and minor traffic infractions, this moment, waiting for a greasy meal that would satisfy his craving, was the highlight of his day. He glanced down at his gut, which was barely pudging out over his belt. While he worked out consistently, the drive-thru meals were taking their toll on his mid-40s body. The button on his uniform pants strained slightly when he sat, a reminder that his metabolism wasn't what it once was in his younger days on the force. Still, the convenience of a quick meal on patrol outweighed the consequences. At least, that's what he told himself. The car in front of him hadn't moved for nearly 3 minutes. Bowman drummed his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel, watching as the digital clock on his dashboard ticked forward. He was supposed to be off duty in less than an hour, and the stack of paperwork waiting for him back at the station would ensure he'd be there well past his shift if he didn't get moving soon. "Come on, get your food and move on," Bowman muttered to himself, resisting the urge to tap his horn. He inched his patrol car forward, trying to see what was causing the holdup. Bowman thought about honking the horn to get the car in front of him to move, but he thought better of it once he spotted Manny poking his head out from the window, engaged in animated conversation with the customer. Manny's hands gestured enthusiastically as he spoke, his long ponytail swinging with each movement. "Well, that explains it," Bowman said with a sigh. "Love you, Manny, but you gotta keep that chatter to a minimum when there's a line." Bowman looked to his right, back towards the highway that ran parallel with the ocean on the other side of it. The restaurant was close to the middle of Bodie Island, which had the majority of businesses and houses on the Outer Banks. The tourist season was winding down, and the usual bumper-to-bumper traffic had thinned considerably. The island would soon return to its locals-only winter hibernation, a prospect that filled Bowman with quiet relief. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, reflecting off the windows of the beachfront properties that lined the shore. Those expensive homes would soon sit empty until the next summer, their owners retreating to mainland lives until the warmth returned. Bowman had lived here his entire life, watching as the sleepy fishing village of his youth transformed into a tourist hotspot, complete with overpriced seafood restaurants and kitschy souvenir shop. Finally, the car in front of him pulled out, allowing him to drive up. Manny, a middle-aged man with long dark hair streaked with gray, greeted him with a smile that crinkled the sun-weathered skin around his eyes. His apron was stained with the day's specials, and a small grease burn marked his forearm, another battle scar from years in the restaurant business. "Officer Bowman, I thought I recognized your order. How are you doing on this fine evening?" Manny called out, leaning through the window. "Oh, you know me, Manny. Ready to have an easy night after this tourist season," Bowman replied, already reaching for his wallet. "I don't know about you, but it was rough this year. Felt like it would never end," Manny said, shaking his head as he bagged Bowman's food. The scent of fried fish and seasoned fries wafted from the kitchen behind him, causing Bowman's stomach to growl audibly. Manny chuckled at the sound, clearly taking it as a compliment to his cooking. "Tell me about it." "Spent the better part of the summer breaking up house parties," Bowman said with a grimace. "House parties? Do people think this is Myrtle Beach or something?" Manny asked incredulously, his eyebrows shooting up. "I don't know, Manny. I think some county commissioner wanted to get young people interested in lighthouses or some shit. All I know is I'm glad that this season is coming to an end." Manny nodded as he grabbed Bowman's order, handing it through the window. The paper bag was warm and slightly greasy, promising comfort food that would simultaneously satisfy and punish his body. The officer extended his hand out with his debit card, but Manny waved him off, pushing the card back toward Bowman. "Your money's no good here," Manny insisted, with a dismissive gesture. "Manny, take the money. If you close down, I might have to start eating healthy," Bowman retorted, pushing the card forward again. Manny thought about it for a moment before shaking his head and taking the card. His expression softened, revealing the friendship that had developed over countless drive-through encounters. Okay, but you're getting a discount, and I'm not taking no for an answer. Bowman chuckled, nodding appreciatively as Manny ran the card. The two men had known each other for over a decade, since Manny had opened his restaurant after leaving a corporate job on the mainland. The restaurant had become a fixture for locals, surviving the seasonal ebb and flow of the island economy. As Manny handed the card back to the officer, Bowman looked over to the highway as several car horns blared out. A sedan blew through the red light, nearly causing an accident as it swerved between vehicles. The tires squealed against the asphalt as the driver made a sharp turn, narrowly avoiding a collision with a minivan full of what appeared to be a family heading home from a day at the beach. "Looks like duty calls," Bowman said, putting his card back in his wallet and placing his food on the passenger seat. "I'll catch you next time, Bowman," Manny replied. The officer nodded as he accelerated out from the restaurant, waiting until he was nearly back out to the highway before hitting the lights and siren. The familiar wail cut through the evening air as Bowman pulled onto the road, quickly catching up to the speeding sedan. The vehicle hesitated for a moment before pulling over to the side of the road, its brake lights glowing red in the deepening twilight. Bowman pulled up behind the sedan, putting the car in park and picking up the radio. He ran the plates quickly, confirming the vehicle wasn't reported stolen before proceeding. "Come in, dispatch. This is Bowman," he said into the receiver, eyes never leaving the sedan in front of him. "What do you got, Bowman?" The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. Bowman recognized Tina's voice. She'd been working dispatch for as long as he'd been on the force. "Sedan blew through a red light near Manny's restaurant," he replied, observing the driver's silhouette through the rear window. Something about the way the person was moving seemed off, erratic, and frantic. "I got something in the area for you," Tina responded, the sound of keyboard clicking audible in the background. "All right, dispatch, Bowman trailed off as he saw the driver waving his hands frantically, trying to get the officer's attention. Blood was clearly visible, even from Bowman's position behind the vehicle. "I'm going to need you to hang on a second," he said. "But Bowman, I think it's serious," Tina pressed, her voice taking on an urgent tone that caught Bowman's attention. "This might be too. Hang on." Bowman dropped the radio receiver, jumping out of his patrol car and moving cautiously towards the sedan in front of him. The cool evening air hit his face as he approached, hand hovering over his service weapon on his hip. Years of experience had taught him to expect the unexpected, especially when blood was involved. He grabbed onto his weapon fully once he spotted blood on the driver's hands, which were still waving frantically through the window. "You can stop waving your hands, just keep them where I can see them," Bowman commanded in his authoritative police voice, approaching the driver's side with measured steps. Bowman stepped up to the driver's window, seeing a scared young man that couldn't be more than 20. His shirt was covered in blood, coming from a wound on his upper right arm, which was badly bandaged, with a torn beach towel that had once featured bright tropical fish, but was now stained a dark crimson. The young man's face was pale, a sheen of sweat visible on his forehead despite the cool evening breeze. "What's going on, young man?" Bowman asked, scanning the interior of the vehicle for any signs of weapons or other occupants, but finding none. "Some crazy asshole bit me and I'm trying to get to the medical clinic south of here," the man replied, his voice shaking slightly. He lifted his arm to show Bowman the wound, and fresh blood seeped through the makeshift bandage. "Somebody bit you," Bowman repeated, his eyebrows raising in disbelief. In 15 years of law enforcement on the island, he dealt with stabbings, shootings, and even a harpoon incident, but a bite severe enough to cause this much bleeding was new territory. "Yeah, I know how it sounds, but that's what happened," the man insisted, his eyes darting nervously between Bowman and the rearview mirror, as if expecting his attacker to appear at any moment. "Where's the biter now?" Bowman asked. "The hell if I know, officer," the man replied, his tone bordering on insolent despite his condition. Bowman took a firmer tone in response, his patience wearing thin. "Bitten or not, you're going to tell me what I need to know before I let you go. Now where's the biter?" he demanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. The man let out a defeated sigh, knowing he had to play along. His shoulders slumped as the adrenaline that had been sustaining him began to ebb. "I was on the beach near Atlantic Avenue and this guy just ran up to me. Before I knew what happened, I was missing a chunk of my arm. I shoved the guy away, and he got tangled up in the netting that was in front of the dunes. I ran back to my car and didn't look back. Bowman studied the man for a moment, believing he was telling the truth. The fear in his eyes was genuine, and the wound certainly appeared to be a bite mark from what Bowman could see through the soaked bandage. Okay, that helps. But why are you going to the med clinic instead of the hospital, which is closer? Bowman asked, puzzled by the man's decision to drive further with such a serious injury. The man let out another sigh, shaking his head in frustration at another question. His fingers tapped impatiently against the steering wheel, leaving small smears of blood. I tried there, and the emergency room was overflowing. One of the security guards said I might have a better chance at the med clinic. That detail caught Bowman's attention. The island hospital was never overwhelmed this late in the season. Even during the height of summer, it rarely reached capacity. Something unusual was happening, and the knot of unease in Bowman's stomach tightened. Okay, I'm going to let you off with a warning. The med clinic is just a few miles up ahead on your left, but make sure you get there at the speed limit and stopping when you're supposed to. The man nodded appreciatively, relief washing over his features. Thank you. Have a good night, officer. Bowman stepped back, allowing the man to drive off. The sedan pulled away carefully this time, the driver seemingly taking Bowman's warning to heart. The officer watched until the taillights disappeared around a bend in the road before walking back to his car, getting in and grabbing the radio. The food Manny had prepared sat forgotten on the passenger seat, no longer steaming. Sorry, dispatch, I'm back. I'm heading up towards Atlantic Avenue to check on an assault, he reported. The dispatcher's voice came through, speaking in a serious tone that Bowman isn't used to hearing from the usually unflappable Tina. Officer, I need you to listen to me. You need to get over to the sea shanty restaurant right now. Bowman felt his pulse quicken at her tone. Tina was not one for dramatics. If she sounded concerned, the situation was serious. What's going on, dispatch? He asked, starting his engine. We got a call about one of the patrons attacking the waitstaff. Multiple injuries. Medical en route. Copy that, dispatch. I'm on the way, Bowman replied, putting his car into drive but not pulling out. He paused and thought for a moment before hitting the radio again. Hey, dispatch, did they say what kind of attack it was? He asked, almost dreading the answer. Yeah, and you're not going to believe it, Tina replied, her voice tight with tension. They said the guy went crazy and started biting people. Bowman let out a sigh, not sure of what to make of the information, only knowing it can't be good. 2 biting incidents in one night was beyond coincidence. His food would definitely be cold by the time he got to it. If he got to it at all. Copy that. I'll be on site in 5, he confirmed, flipping on his siren as traffic thickened ahead. Chapter 2. Officer Bowman drove down the highway towards the sea shanty restaurant. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road, painting the landscape in deepening shades of orange and purple. His patrol car's siren cut through the evening air, parting the sparse traffic before him like a knife. The sea shanty was right on the main road, a popular tourist spot for their all-you-can-eat shrimp special. The weathered wooden building featured nautical decorations that walked the fine line between charming and tacky. Fishing nets draped across the walls, life preservers painted with the restaurant logo, and a giant plastic shark suspended from the ceiling. During peak season, the wait for a table could stretch well over an hour, with families lining up outside for the chance to gorge themselves on bottomless baskets of fried seafood. As he pulled into the driveway, Bowman noticed the parking lot was still packed with cars, but there was no ambulance in sight. This struck him as odd given the nature of the call. Must not be that big of a deal if people are still eating their meals, Bowman muttered to himself. Bowman pulled up to the front of the building, parking right in front. As he exited the squad car, he could hear the sound of another siren getting close. He turned and spotted the ambulance as it pulled in, parking just behind him. "How's it going, Bowman?" a familiar voice called out. Officer Bowman turned around, spotting Carter, one of the paramedics on the ambulance. The paramedic was already grabbing his medical kit from the vehicle, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had responded to countless emergencies. Both men had worked the Outer Banks for the better part of the last decade, so they knew each other pretty well. Carter's salt and pepper hair and the lines around his eyes spoke to his experience, but his movements remained quick and purposeful despite the long hours his job demanded. "Still too early to tell, Carter, but all signs point to another long night," Bowman replied. "Tell me about it. We've been running nonstop since noon," Carter said. Carter's partner, a younger paramedic Bowman didn't recognize, hurried around the ambulance, gathering additional supplies. His fresh-faced appearance and overeager movements marked him as new to the island. Probably a transfer from the mainland looking for what he thought would be an easy gig in paradise. "Is something going on that I'm not aware of? Because I just had someone tell me that the emergency room is backed up," Bowman asked. "You know that flu that's been going around?" Carter asked, pausing his preparations. "Yeah. What about it?" Bowman asked. "Apparently it's hitting people harder than normal. We've ran a dozen people with severe flu symptoms today," Carter explained. "And now we got biters," Bowman said, the words leaving a strange taste in his mouth. In his 15 years on the force, he'd never had to use that particular term before. "Wait, plural?" Carter asked. "Apparently. One here, one near Atlantic Avenue," Bowman confirmed. Carter shook his head, while his partner grabbed some supplies off the truck. The younger paramedic seemed oblivious to the conversation, focused instead on preparing for whatever awaited them inside. As the two men talked, the manager of the restaurant stepped out. He was middle-aged, with a receding hairline and sweat stains darkening the armpits of his button-up shirt. His face was pale and drawn, eyes darting nervously between the officer and the ambulance. "Thank God you're here," he said, relief evident in his voice. The manager walked over to Bowman and Carter, both of whom looked down at his name tag that read, "Mr. Hopkins." The plastic tag was slightly askew, as if he'd been grabbed or jostled recently. "Are you the manager?" Bowman asked, studying the man's disheveled appearance. "Yeah, I am," Hopkins confirmed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "What's going on in there?" Bowman asked. Hopkins motioned for them to follow, and the officer, along with the two paramedics, fell in behind him as he led them toward the entrance, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush. "One of our bus boys fainted and hit the ground pretty hard. A few people tried to help him, but when he woke up, he just started biting." The manager's voice cracked slightly on the last word, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was saying. Bowman and Carter exchanged a concerned glance. Neither man needed to verbalize their thoughts about the similarity to the incident Bowman had just mentioned. "How many are injured?" Carter asked. "3 people, but one is pretty severe," Hopkins replied, pushing open the heavy wooden door to the restaurant. The air inside hit them immediately, a nauseating mixture of fried food, sweat, and the metallic tang of blood. The lighting was dim, designed to create a cozy atmosphere for diners, but now it cast unsettling shadows across the faces of the patrons. The 4 of them walked into the main part of the restaurant, which was still packed. A few people continued eating, forks mechanically moving between plate and mouth as if determined to get their money's worth despite the chaos. Most, however, were sitting in stunned silence, their food forgotten as they stared at nothing in particular or whispered in hushed tones to their companions. Hopkins pointed to the corner booth, which had an injured woman holding a bar towel to her neck area. The white cloth was stained with an alarming amount of blood, and the woman's face had taken on the waxy pallor of someone going into shock. Carter's partner rushed over there to tend to her, medical training overriding any hesitation. "Why is everyone just sitting here like nothing happened?" Bowman asked, scanning the room with growing disbelief. The normalcy amid what was clearly a violent incident struck him as deeply wrong. "It can be difficult to get out of our driveway, and I didn't want to risk you guys not being able to get in, so I told everyone if they waited here until you arrived, that I would comp their meals," Hopkins explained, a hint of defensive pride creeping into his voice. Bowman resisted the urge to shake his head at the absurdity of the situation. People were willing to sit in a restaurant where someone had just gone on a biting rampage, all for a free meal. It spoke volumes about human nature. Or at least, tourist nature. "Well, that's appreciated," Carter said diplomatically, though his eyes betrayed his true thoughts. They continued walking through the restaurant. 2 other people sat at the bar, both of them nursing arm injuries. One man had what looked like a clean bite taken out of his forearm, the wound partially wrapped in a cocktail napkin. The other victim, a woman in her 50s, appeared less severely injured, with a superficial bite on her wrist that had already been cleaned and bandaged by someone with rudimentary first aid knowledge. "Where's the busboy now?" Bowman asked, his hand instinctively moving closer to his service weapon. "Wouldn't listen to me, so a few of us had to force him into the back," Hopkins replied, leading them toward the swinging kitchen doors. "You handle that. I'll take care of the injured here," Carter said to Bowman, already moving toward the bar to check on the other victims. Bowman nodded and followed Hopkins into the back kitchen area, where a loud banging sound could be heard coming from the rear of it. The cooks stood in a loose cluster, not working, just staring in the direction of the noise. Their faces were masks of confusion and fear, several of them clutching kitchen implements that had clearly been repurposed as makeshift weapons. One heavy-set cook gripped a meat cleaver with white-knuckled intensity, while another held a rolling pin like a club. "What's making that noise?" Bowman asked, though he already had his suspicions. "See for yourself," Hopkins replied, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. Hopkins brought Bowman around the corner, revealing his office, which had a large glass window that allowed the manager to keep an eye on the kitchen operations while handling paperwork. Inside was the busboy, though Bowman hesitated to use that term anymore. The young man looked to be in his late teens, but any trace of humanity had been stripped from his features. The creature became agitated when it spotted Bowman and Hopkins, smacking its hands on the glass, smearing blood and chomping its mouth. Its eyes were vacant, devoid of recognition or intelligence, focused only on the potential prey outside its makeshift cage. Blood covered the front of its uniform, a mixture of its own and what Bowman assumed must belong to the victims in the dining room. "Well, he doesn't look happy," Bowman quipped. "I don't know how to explain it. He's always been a good kid, but tonight—" Hopkins trailed off, clearly at a loss for words to describe the transformation he had witnessed. The office showed signs of a struggle: a toppled chair, papers scattered across the floor, a phone pulled from the wall. The creature had clearly not gone quietly into confinement. Was anything out of the ordinary with him? Did he take drugs, drinking, anything? Bowman pressed, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Every instinct told him this was not a simple case of intoxication or mental breakdown, but his mind struggled to accept any alternative explanation. "No, nothing serious like that. I mean, he wasn't happy about being called in tonight because he has that flu going around," Hopkins replied. Bowman side-eyed Hopkins, momentarily distracted from the horror show behind the glass by the manager's casual admission. "He had the flu and you made him come in?" Bowman asked, unable to keep the disapproval from his voice. "It's part of the job requirement. If I call, you have to come in," Hopkins replied. "Sick people working around food? What could possibly go wrong?" Bowman remarked, his sarcasm thick enough to cut with a knife. "I'm not sure why you're angry about that," Hopkins replied. "Because I've eaten here before," Bowman shot back. Hopkins piped down as Bowman put the issue aside, continuing to stare at the creature trapped behind glass. Oscar's movements were uncoordinated yet determined, driven by some base instinct that demanded he reach the living flesh on the other side of his transparent prison. "Go get Carter for me," Bowman instructed, never taking his eyes off the transformed busboy. "Which one is he again?" Hopkins asked. "The one at the bar," Bowman replied tersely, his patience wearing thinner by the minute. Hopkins nodded and ran off, leaving Bowman to continue staring at the creature. It was like he was studying it, because it was something he had never encountered before. The movements were jerky and unnatural, as if the boy's body was being operated by someone with only a passing familiarity with human locomotion. A few moments later, Carter joined him, medical bag in hand. "Is everything all right, Bowman?" Carter asked, his voice trailing off as he caught sight of what was behind the glass. Bowman stepped back, pointing to the zombie, who grew more agitated at the sight of Carter. The paramedic froze at the sight, not sure of what to make of it. "Meet the busboy," Bowman said grimly. Carter remained silent, staring at the ghoul as it thrashed about, throwing itself against the glass with increased vigor. A string of drool hung from its mouth, mixing with the blood that stained its chin and throat. "Have you ever seen anything like that?" Bowman asked, hoping Carter's medical experience might provide some rational explanation. "I can't say that I have. It's like he's—" Carter searched for words, his professional vocabulary failing him in the face of what appeared more supernatural than medical. "Possessed?" Bowman finished for him, giving voice to the irrational thought that had been lurking in his mind. "That's one word for it," Carter conceded, unable to offer a better alternative. "Did you want to examine him?" Bowman asked, though the question was more formality than serious inquiry. Neither man seemed eager to open the door separating them from whatever the young man had become. The zombified busboy hit the glass so hard that a small crack spiderwebbed out from the impact. Both men stepped back when it happened, their hands instinctively moving to protect themselves. "You know, I think I'm good. I'll let you guys handle getting him out of there handcuffed." Carter stared at the zombie biting the air intensely before continuing, "and probably in a muzzle before I examine him." "I'm thinking that's a good call," Bowman replied. "Really?" Carter asked, surprise evident in his tone. "Of course, I'm calling this in and letting some of the younger officers wrestle this guy to the ground." "There's no way in hell I'm doing it," Bowman replied with a hint of a smirk. Carter let out a laugh, prompting Bowman to join in. The brief moment of levity provided a small release from the tension that had been building since they arrived. It was short-lived, as Carter's partner yelled out from the front of the restaurant, his voice joined by a chorus of screams from patrons. "Carter, I need help." Chapter 3. Carter and Officer Bowman hesitated for a moment as the screams continued to grow in the dining room. The sound was primal and desperate, raw human fear given voice. They froze, each man caught in that momentary paralysis that comes with confronting something beyond normal experience. The noise grew, rising to a crescendo of panic. Finally, they broke out of it and ran through the kitchen. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. The heavy thud of their footsteps echoed against the stainless steel counters as they rushed toward the dining area. The cooks continued standing there, unsure of what to do. Their faces were blank with shock, hands still clutching various kitchen implements. "Get out through the back!" Bowman barked out the order, the authority in his voice snapping them from their stupor. The cooks complied immediately, dropping what they were holding and scrambling toward the rear exit. Pots clattered to the floor, forgotten in their haste to escape whatever horror awaited on the other side of the swinging doors. Bowman drew his handgun, the weight of it reassuring in his palm. He grabbed onto Carter and pulled him back so that he could be first through the door. He plowed through the swinging doors into the dining room, which was in chaos. People ran in all directions, a few coming their way towards the emergency exit down the side hallway that led to the bathrooms. Others tried to push their way out through the front door, but it was tightly packed, creating a backlog. Bodies pressed against each other, desperation making them heedless of personal space or courtesy. The all-you-can-eat special was thoroughly forgotten now, plates of half-eaten food abandoned on tables. Bowman looked towards the front corner booth where the second paramedic had been treating the injured woman. He wasn't there, and the woman was missing too. The booth was empty save for blood-soaked napkins and a discarded medical kit. The absences sent a spike of dread through Bowman's chest. "Where the hell did they go?" he muttered, eyes scanning the room for any sign of them. Another scream pierced the air, drawing Bowman's attention away from the door toward the far wall where the zombified woman ran up and tackled Mr. Hopkins. The manager had been trying to direct people toward the exit, his arms waving frantically, when she struck. The force of her attack sent them both crashing into a table, sending plates and glasses shattering across the floor. Bowman watched from afar, helpless to do anything as the creature latched onto the manager's neck. In an instant, it pulled back, sending blood spraying on the tacky decor on the wall. The arterial spray painted a macabre mural across the faded fishing nets and decorative life preservers. Hopkins's mouth opened in a silent scream, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "Jesus Christ," Bowman swore, the profanity inadequate to express the horror unfolding before him. Bowman rushed forward, trying to get to the manager, only to spot hostile movement coming from the front of the building. Another zombified patron, who was missing chunks of flesh on his neck, ran towards the line of people trying to get out. Bowman didn't hesitate, raising his handgun and firing 3 quick rounds. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, cutting through the screams and causing several people to duck instinctively. 1 bullet missed, kicking up splinters from a wooden support beam. 2 hit the creature in the side of the torso, which didn't slow it down. It did, however, pull it into the officer's direction, its vacant eyes now fixed on this new target. Bowman fired again, hitting the zombie in the heart, which didn't even make it flinch. The creature ran through tables and chairs, sending them toppling over. Its forward momentum seemed unstoppable, defying the physical damage that should have dropped any normal human instantly. Without thinking, Bowman raised his weapon and fired a single round into the ghoul's head, dropping it. The creature went down mid-stride, collapsing like a puppet with cut strings. It landed face first on the hardwood floor with a sickening thud, a dark pool spreading from beneath its shattered skull. He stood there, bewildered for a moment, the gun still raised as if expecting the thing to rise again. In all his years on the force, he'd never seen someone take multiple center mass shots without slowing down. The training range never prepared him for this. "Officer, I need you over here," the second paramedic called out. Bowman's head swung around, spotting Carter and his partner grabbing onto the reanimated woman's body, pulling her off the manager, who slumped over into the booth, bleeding out. The woman, the same one who had been injured earlier, now thrashed and snapped at the paramedics, trying to bite whatever flesh she could reach. Her once shocked expression had transformed into one of mindless hunger. The zombie flailed about, trying to break free of the paramedic's grip, but unable to do so. Each had an arm, holding them outright as they turned, presenting her to the officer like some grotesque offering. Blood from her neck wound had soaked the front of her blouse, her skin pale with blood loss that should have killed her. Bowman didn't hesitate, adjusting his aim and quickly firing a round straight through the zombie woman's head. Both paramedics jumped back, letting go of her arms, causing the body to crumple to the ground. She fell in a heap, limbs splayed at unnatural angles, a look of vacant surprise frozen on her face. "What the hell, man?" Carter shouted. Everything fell quiet for a moment as the last of the customers filed out of the building. The initial wave of panic had subsided, leaving behind an eerie calm punctuated only by distant screams from the parking lot and the moans of the injured. A few of the wait staff were by the bar, including the 2 bitten ones. They watched on, not sure of what to do, their faces pale with shock. "Sorry about that, Carter, but it needed to be done," Bowman said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "She needed a bullet to the head?" Carter demanded, looking at Bowman as if he'd lost his mind. The paramedic's hands were shaking, whether from exertion or shock was impossible to tell. Bowman motioned his head towards the first creature he put down, getting them to look over. The corpse lay where it had fallen, dark fluid pooling beneath its head. "That one took 3 bullets to the upper body, and the damn thing didn't even slow down. 1 to the head did the trick, though," Bowman explained, trying to keep his voice clinical, detached. The second paramedic was in shock, taking a few steps away before collapsing into a chair. His breathing was rapid and shallow, hands gripping the seat edge so tightly his knuckles whitened. He stared at nothing in particular, his mind clearly struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. Carter walked over to Mr. Hopkins, checking for a pulse in what seemed more like a professional reflex than any real hope. He shook his head when he realized the manager was dead. The wound on Hopkins' neck was catastrophic, the torn flesh revealing the white of cervical vertebrae beneath. "This is crazy, Bowman," Carter said, his voice hollow as he straightened up from examining the body. "Tell me about it, Carter," Bowman replied, surveying the devastation around them. The restaurant looked like a war zone. Overturned tables, broken glass, blood spattered across surfaces designed for family dining. Carter walked over to his partner, making sure he was all right. He placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder, speaking to him in low, reassuring tones. The words themselves didn't matter. It was the human connection in the face of something incomprehensible that counted. As he did, Bowman holstered his weapon, still in a bit of shock. In all his years, he hadn't fired his weapon outside of a range, so this was new. The grip of his handgun had left an impression on his palm, and the smell of cordite hung in the air, mixing unpleasantly with the sense of food and blood. A moment later, Hopkins began moving again. At first, it was subtle, fingers twitching, head rolling slightly to one side, but it was soon significant. Everybody looked over towards him as the zombified manager rolled over, falling into the booth. His movements were uncoordinated yet deliberate, a mockery of the living person he had been minutes before. Bowman began to draw his weapon, but before he could aim and fire, one of the waitstaff ran over, swinging a bar stool as hard as he could. It cracked Hopkins in the face, sending him back and off his feet. The crunch of breaking facial bones carried clearly across the now quiet dining room. Another server ran over, delivering a forceful kick to the side of the zombified manager's head, sending it to the ground. The server put his foot onto the creature's back, holding it down so his friend could crack it over the top of the head several times with the bar stool, putting it down for good. With each impact, the stool's legs became more bent and bloodied until the creature finally stopped moving entirely. "Well, that was excessive," Carter remarked. "He was an asshole and deserved every bit of that," the server spat, breathing heavily from the exertion. Years of built-up resentment had found an outlet in that moment of violence. The exertion caused one of the servers to begin bleeding again, his arm bandage falling off during the attack. Blood seeped from the bite wound, which looked deep and jagged. Carter spotted it and walked over to help fix it, his paramedic instincts overriding his personal shock. "We need to get you two over to the hospital for some more treatment," he said, carefully rewrapping the bandage around the server's arm. The server reluctantly agreed, motioning for his injured coworker to follow him out. The second bitten server looked pale and feverish already, sweat beading on her forehead despite the restaurant's air conditioning. Bowman turned back to the other waitstaff, who still wasn't sure what to do. "Okay, I want all of you to get back home, lock the doors, and don't come out until someone tells you to. Do you understand?" Bowman instructed, his tone firm but controlled. Nobody reacted, their expressions blank with shock and disbelief. They stood frozen, like extras in a play who had forgotten their cues. "I said, is that understood?" Bowman raised his voice, the sharp command cutting through their daze. The servers snapped into it, nodding and running out of the back of the restaurant. Their footsteps echoed as they fled, carrying them away from the scene of carnage. Carter and his partner guided the two injured servers out of the building, with Bowman following behind. As the second paramedic got the injured waitstaff situated in the ambulance, Carter and Bowman stepped to the side to talk. The ambulance's flashing lights created an alternating red-white strobe effect across their grave faces. "This is a hell of a mess. What can I do?" Carter asked, running a hand through his hair. Bowman thought for a moment before responding, weighing his words carefully. "Don't worry about this. I'll call it in." Carter nodded appreciatively, relief evident in his expression. The paperwork for something like this would be a nightmare, and both men knew it. "Okay, but once we drop them off, I can come back if you need me," Carter offered. But Bowman called out as his friend began walking away, a sudden urgency in his voice. "Hey, Carter, I need you to do me a favor." "Sure thing. What is it, Bowman?" Carter turned back, eyebrows raised in question. "Get off the island. Take them over to the Bertie Hospital," Bowman replied. "Bertie? That's like an hour and a half away on a good day," Carter protested, confusion evident in his expression. "I know, but something isn't right on the island," Bowman said. Carter could hear the worry in Bowman's voice, which caused him more concern since Bowman was as steady as they came. In all the years they'd worked together, he'd never heard the officer express anything close to fear. "Yeah, sure, man, we'll take him to Bertie," he agreed, not fully understanding but trusting Bowman's instincts. "And watch those bites," Bowman added, the warning hanging ominously in the night air. Carter was already suspecting them, given what they had seen. He nodded before jumping behind the wheel of the ambulance and taking off. The vehicle pulled away, its siren wailing into the darkness as it carried them and the injured servers away from the island. Bowman stood outside the building for a moment, still wrapping his head around what just happened. The night had taken on a surreal quality, as if he had stepped into some alternate reality where the normal rules no longer applied. He looked into the restaurant, thinking about the busboy in the back, but ultimately leaving him be. Bowman walked back to his police cruiser, his footfalls echoing in the night air. He slid into the driver's seat, the familiar confines of the vehicle offering a momentary comfort. He grabbed the radio once he was securely inside, the static a reassuring sound of normalcy. "Dispatch, do you copy?" he called. "Loud and clear. What's the situation at the sea shanty?" The dispatcher responded promptly. Bowman hesitated for a moment before responding, unsure how to summarize what he'd just experienced in a way that wouldn't sound insane. "It's more or less dealt with. But listen, have you gotten any calls at the hospital?" he asked. "How'd you know?" the dispatcher asked, surprise evident in her tone. "What's going on?" Bowman pressed, ignoring the question. "Their security called a couple minutes ago saying they had an unruly patient that they couldn't handle. So I sent Price over there," she explained. Bowman's grip tightened on the radio as a wave of concern washed over him. If what happened at the restaurant was happening elsewhere, Price might be walking into something far worse than an unruly patient. "Get in touch with Price and tell them to be on alert, and if anybody charges at him, to aim for the head. I'm headed there now," Bowman instructed, already starting the engine. The dispatcher's voice showed concern, the professional detachment cracking slightly. "What in the world are you talking about, Bowman?" "Just do it now," Bowman snapped, the urgency of the situation overriding his usual calm demeanor. The dispatcher fell silent, not accustomed to Bowman talking in that manner. In all her years working with him, he'd always been the voice of reason, the steady presence during whatever storm they were facing. "Okay, I'll do it," she finally replied. "Thank you, I'll be on scene in 10. Chapter 4. Officer Bowman sped down the highway, lights flashing and siren blaring. The evening had fully surrendered to night now, darkness settling over the island like a shroud. His headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating a path forward, while the pulsing blue and red emergency lights reflected off nearby buildings and trees. He weaved in and out through traffic, his thoughts on Price at the hospital. The younger officer had only been on the force for 3 years, transferred from a quiet mainland precinct where the most serious crimes involved drunk tourists and petty theft. Nothing in his training would have prepared him for what Bowman had just encountered. The road ahead blurred slightly as his mind replayed the images from the restaurant, the vacant eyes of the zombified busboy, the spray of blood as the manager's throat was torn open, the way the creatures had continued advancing despite bullets tearing through their torsos. After several minutes of driving, he pulled off the highway down a major cross street, taking him a few blocks down to the hospital entrance. The 4-story medical center was the island's primary care facility, typically adequate for the local population, but often strained during peak tourist season. It sat like a concrete fortress against the night sky, lights blazing from every window. He made the turn into the emergency room parking lot, amazed at how packed it was. Cars filled nearly every space, some parked haphazardly across lines or on grassy medians. A few ambulances sat with their engines running, paramedics visible through open rear doors as they attended to patients who hadn't yet been admitted. "Christ, half the island is out here," Bowman muttered to himself, scanning the scene with growing unease. The parking lot was typically sparse, even during the busy tourist season, let alone this close to the end of the season. Instead, virtually every parking spot was taken up. Bowman looked to the entrance to the emergency room, spotting a few people milling about. A couple people smoked, but mostly the people were just standing there, waiting. The glass doors slid open and closed periodically as hospital staff moved between the building and the ambulances, their white coats and scrubs flashing briefly in the night before disappearing back inside. His first instinct was to pull right up to the door, but he knew if things got crazy, getting back to the car might be an issue. The last thing he needed was to be trapped without transportation if the situation deteriorated further. Bowman looked around, pulling it onto a small island in the middle of the road, throwing it into park before grabbing a small portable radio from the dash. He clicked it on, turning it to Price's frequency. "Hey Price, it's Bowman, do you copy?" he called. the words echoing slightly in the confines of his patrol car. He sat there for a moment, eagerly awaiting the response, hoping it would come. The seconds stretched interminably, each one increasing the knot of dread in his stomach. Finally, his comrade's voice crackled through, strained and tight with tension. "Bowman? Thank God, man, I need all kinds of help." Bowman could hear a loud banging sound coming from Price's end of the line, a rhythmic thudding that carried ominous implications after what he'd witnessed at the restaurant. "What's that noise, Price?" Bowman asked, though he already suspected the answer. "You know, that unruly patient I got sent out for?" Price's voice was pitched higher than normal, stress evident in every syllable. "Yeah?" Bowman prompted. "Well, it was more than one, and they're trying to break down the door." "Where are you right now?" Bowman asked. "We're in imaging," Price replied, his voice nearly drowned out by the increasing commotion in the background. "Okay, hang tight. I'm coming in to get you," Bowman assured him. "We're not going anywhere," Price responded, a grim attempt at humor that fell flat. The line went dead as Bowman hooked the radio to his vest. He stepped out of his car, the cool night air a momentary shock against his skin. He reached back in and grabbed the shotgun, the weight of it reassuring in his hands. The weapon was standard issue for patrol cars, rarely used but meticulously maintained. Bowman checked to make sure it's loaded, reaching into the center console and grabbing a handful more shells, shoving them into his pocket. Bowman turned and began jogging towards the emergency room entrance, knowing time was of the essence. His boots struck the pavement with purposeful thuds, the sound drawing attention from those gathered outside. A few of the people standing outside the door spotted him, taking a few steps back to give him room. Their expressions ranged from relief at the sight of law enforcement to confusion about the shotgun he carried. Bowman stepped into the waiting room, which was packed with people. Every chair was taken, several people sitting in wheelchairs and on the floor. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic, overlaid with the unmistakable metallic scent of blood and the sour tang of sweat and illness. Some of the people had bites on various parts of their body, while others looked like they were overwhelmed with the flu that was going around. The non-injured or sick family members were awash with worry, nobody really reacting to his presence. A bad sign in Bowman's experience. Typically, the arrival of an officer with a shotgun would draw immediate attention, but these people were too consumed by their own suffering to notice. Bowman scanned the room, taking in details with the practiced eye of a veteran officer. A child cried softly in his mother's arms. An elderly couple held hands with matching expressions of patient endurance. A middle-aged man pressed a blood-soaked towel to his forearm. Medical staff moved between patients, their faces showing exhaustion and stress. Two security guards stood near a hallway entrance, hands resting on their belts, eyes constantly scanning the crowd. Bowman snapped back to the moment, looking for the nurse's station. Once he spotted it, he marched over, which spooked the nurse. His beefy stature carrying a shotgun created an intimidating figure, and the young woman behind the desk recoiled slightly, her eyes widening. "Where is imaging?" Bowman demanded. The nurse continued to remain speechless, a little scared of the situation. She glanced nervously at the shotgun, then back at his face, her hand hovering over what Bowman assumed was a panic button under the desk. He realized he was imposing, so he softened his tone. The last thing he needed was to be delayed by frightened hospital staff. "Ma'am, I need to know where imaging is, and there's not much time," he said, keeping his voice low but urgent. "Okay, yes sir, I can buzz you in," she finally responded, her hand moving to a button on the desk. "It's down the hall. Take a left at the first hallway and keep going until you get to the end. Then turn right. You can't miss it." Bowman nodded. He heard the buzzer sounding for the door, but didn't go yet. He looked back to the waiting room and at how packed it was. His gut was telling him it was a catastrophe waiting to happen. If even a fraction of these people transformed like the woman at the restaurant, the resulting carnage would be unimaginable. "Is there something else, officer?" the nurse asked, noticing his hesitation. Bowman leaned down, speaking in low, hushed tones to avoid causing panic among the waiting patients. "You need to clear these people out of here right now and lock this place down." The nurse wasn't sure of how to respond to that, but after a moment she shook her head no, her professional training kicking in against what must have sounded like an absurd request. "I can't do that. You can and you will. You need to do it now, Bowman insisted, struggling to convey the urgency without explaining the horror he'd witnessed. There was no time to make her understand what they were facing. The nurse stood firm, her posture straightening as she faced down the officer. No, these people need help and we're going to give it to them. The determination in her voice was admirable but misguided. Bowman knew he wasn't going to be able to reason with her, so he shook his head, nodding towards the door. The nurse hit the buzzer again, allowing him through. Bowman threw the door open in frustration before running down the hallway. The sterile corridor stretched before him, harsh fluorescent lights illuminating the way. The walls were painted a pale blue, meant to be soothing but now seeming cold and clinical under the circumstances. He moved swiftly, getting to the first turn. He kept his shotgun at the ready, raising it as he turned. The hallway was empty, stretching away in eerie silence. Closed doors lined both sides, some labeled as exam rooms, others as staff areas. A discarded clipboard lay on the floor, papers scattered as if dropped in haste. He continued moving at a brisk pace, getting to the far end. As he approached the adjoining hallway, he could hear banging and moaning coming from around the corner. The sounds were unmistakable now that he knew what to listen for. The mindless persistence of creatures driven by some primal hunger. Bowman inched up, peeking around the corner, spotting 4 zombies pressed up against a door, trying to get in. They were 15 yards away and oblivious to his presence. Their clothes, a mix of patient gowns and street attire, were stained with blood, and their movements were jerky yet purposeful as they threw themselves repeatedly against the door. Bowman made sure the safety was off on his shotgun, taking a deep breath before coming around the corner. He raised it up, aiming it towards the creatures. He moved slowly, ready to fire at a moment's notice, but wanted to get as close as he safely could. Bowman got within 10 yards when the first creature turned its head, spotting him. The ghoul let out a moan, breaking away from the others, rushing towards the officer. Its vacant eyes fixed on him with predatory focus, mouth opening to reveal blood-stained teeth. Bowman squeezed the trigger, sending a round into the face of the creature, exploding its head. The blast echoed deafeningly in the confined space, leaving a ringing in his ears. The creature dropped instantly, its momentum carrying the now lifeless body forward a few more feet before it collapsed in a heap. The officer racked in another shell, the mechanical action smooth from years of practice. He took aim and fired again, detonating the head of another creature. As it fell, it tripped up the other 2, who fell face first onto the ground. They scrambled to regain their footing, fingers clawing at the slick floor. Bowman took advantage of their momentary vulnerability, pulling his sidearm with his free hand and quickly firing 2 rounds into the back of their heads. The shots were precise, each one finding its mark with deadly accuracy. The creatures went still, dark fluid pooling beneath their shattered skulls. Once the hallway fell quiet, he looked in all directions, expecting more ghouls to be coming his way. But he was alone. The bodies lay motionless on the floor, the immediate threat neutralized. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mingling with the coppery scent of blood. "Price?" Bowman called out, his voice echoing slightly in the now silent corridor. A moment later, he heard the door unlock, thrown open a second later. Officer Price stepped out, younger than Bowman, physically fit. His uniform was immaculate, except for a smear of blood on one sleeve, and his hand rested on his holstered weapon. His expression showed relief at the sight of Bowman, but the tightness around his eyes spoke to the stress he'd been under. "Jesus, Bowman! What the hell is going on?" Price demanded, looking away from him at the bodies strewn across the hallway. "Nothing good, Price. We need to get the hell out of here," Bowman replied matter-of-factly. Price motioned back into the room, and 5 people stepped out. 2 of them were in lab coats, while 3 of them were in patient gowns. They moved cautiously, eyeing the corpses with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Are any of you bitten?" Bowman asked. One middle-aged man in a gown raised his hand tentatively, like a schoolchild admitting to wrongdoing. A crude bandage was wrapped around his forearm, blood seeping through the white gauze. "Okay, I'm going to need you to stay in that room," Bowman said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "What for?" the man asked, brow furrowing in confusion and indignation. Bowman loudly tapped his finger on his handgun, getting the man's attention and making his point. The gesture was clear. This wasn't a negotiation. The man nodded, his face pale as understanding dawned. He retreated into the room without further protest, the door closing behind him with a soft click. "Bowman, you gotta tell me what's going on," Price said. Before Bowman could answer, the alarm system in the hospital began blaring. Red lights flashed from fixtures mounted along the ceiling, bathing the corridor in a pulsing crimson glow. A deafening sound filled the air, forcing them to raise their voices. "Something bad, that's what's going on." Chapter 5. Bowman and Price stood in the hallway, trying to figure out where the threat was coming from. The alarm continued to blare, echoing throughout every corridor. The pulsing red emergency lights cast an eerie glow, transforming the sterile hospital environment into something out of a nightmare. Every few seconds, the lights would flash brighter, illuminating the frightened faces of the survivors huddled behind them. "What do we do, Bowman?" Price asked, his voice barely audible above the deafening alarm. Bowman went into thought, not responding. His mind raced through their options, none of them good. "Bowman!" Price shouted, a note of desperation breaking through his professional demeanor. He gripped his sidearm tightly, eyes darting between the hallways, anticipating threats from all directions. Bowman turned to a nurse that was standing behind Price, pointing to her. She flinched slightly at the sudden attention, clutching a clipboard to her chest like a shield. Her scrubs were spattered with dark stains, and her face showed the exhaustion of someone who had been on shift far too long even before the chaos erupted. "We need to get out of here. Where do we go?" Bowman asked forcefully. "The closest exit is through the emergency room," she replied, pointing back the way they had come. Her hand trembled slightly, betraying the calm professionalism she was struggling to maintain. Bowman shook his head vigorously, the motion almost violent in its certainty. "If I'm right, we can't go that way," he stated firmly. "Why not?" Price asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. "Because I think those bites are causing people to go insane," Bowman explained. "And there were a lot of people with bites waiting to be seen," the nurse added, her face paling further as the implications dawned on her. The clipboard slipped slightly in her grasp, her knuckles whitening as she tightened her grip to keep it from falling. "Exactly. So where the hell do we go?" Bowman pressed, the urgency in his voice growing. The nurse thought about it for a moment, as if she was running through a map of the hospital in her mind. Her eyes unfocused briefly, mental calculations playing across her features as she considered and discarded various routes. "We can keep going down this hallway, hang a right, and it'll take us to the cafeteria. There's an emergency exit there," she finally offered, pointing down the corridor ahead of them. Screams echoed down the hallway, along with thundering footsteps coming from the direction of the emergency room. The sounds carried clearly even above the alarm. Desperate human cries cut short, followed by the unmistakable moans Bowman had come to associate with the creatures. Whatever was happening in the emergency room was spreading, and rapidly. "No time to waste, let's move," Bowman commanded. Bowman racked in a fresh shell into his shotgun, grabbing a few more shells from his pocket and loading them up as they ran. Price was close behind, with the 4 civilians bringing up the rear. The group formed a tight formation, instinctively keeping together as they moved through the threatening environment. The group ran hard towards a connecting hallway, Bowman stopping them before they reached it. He raised his fist in a silent command to halt, a gesture ingrained from tactical training. The others froze immediately, understanding the universal signal. He poked his head out from the corner, spotting a handful of zombies tackling a middle-aged man. The victim hit his head hard on the ground, dazing him, as the zombies ripped into him. Blood painted the floor tiles, spreading outward from the writhing mass of bodies. "We have to move quick. Come on," Bowman instructed, his voice low but intense. Bowman broke from cover, everybody else on his heels. As they crossed the opening, a couple of zombies at the top of the hallway spotted them, chasing after them. The creatures moved with frightening speed, driven by hunger that transcended human limitations. "They saw us," the nurse called out, panic edging into her voice as she glanced back. Bowman ignored her pleas, continuing to push forward. Stopping wasn't an option. Momentum was their only advantage. They got within 30 yards of the corner of the building, which connected with another hallway. The corridor stretched before them, doorways passing in a blur as they ran for their lives. Price looked back, seeing that the zombies were catching up with them, which pushed him forward. His athletic build gave him speed, but even he was surprised at how quickly the creatures closed the distance. The gap between the last civilian and the lead creature narrowed with each step, motivating him to run even faster. Bowman knew he didn't have time to hesitate, so he rushed around the corner into the next hallway, immediately spotting 3 ghouls just up ahead, feasting on a poor nurse. Her uniform was in tatters, flesh exposed where they had torn through fabric and skin alike. Her eyes were open but vacant, life having already fled. Bowman raised his shotgun, firing as he ran. The shell slammed into the side of a creature, knocking it off its feet and into the other 2. The blast was deafening in the confined space, adding to the cacophony of alarms and screams. They scrambled to get back to their feet as the officers and civilians raced by, limbs tangling as they fought to regain their balance. As the last man did, a doctor, one of the creatures reached out and smacked his ankle with enough force to send it into his other foot. The man tripped up, falling flat on his face. His glasses flew off, skittering across the floor as he cried out in pain and surprise. "Doctor!" the nurse cried, her voice breaking with concern. The nurse stopped dead in her tracks, retreating to grab her friend. Her instincts betrayed her as the zombies that had been chasing after them caught up in a flash. She let out a muffled scream as they slammed into the 2 of them, their combined weight driving both victims to the floor in a tangle of limbs. The doctor's cry of pain transformed into something more primal as teeth sank into his flesh. "Keep moving," Bowman ordered. Bowman knew there was no helping them as the ghouls swarmed them. He continued pushing forward, approaching the main hallway that cut through the middle of the hospital. The decision to leave them behind would haunt him later, but right now, survival depended on cold calculation. Bowman ran across it, glancing down towards the emergency room, spotting unimaginable carnage. A dozen zombies ripped at the flesh of patients and nurses alike. A couple people tried to fight back, but were quickly overwhelmed. Blood painted the walls, splashed across the institutional white surfaces in a grotesque, abstract pattern. Bodies lay strewn across the floor, some still moving, others terrifyingly still. "We have to help them," Price shouted, instinctively slowing as he witnessed the massacre. "Just keep moving," Bowman countered, grabbing Price's arm to pull him forward. Price muttered obscenities under his breath as he knew Bowman was right. They kept pushing forward, Bowman spotting the sign for the cafeteria. The black lettering with an arrow pointing the way was the most beautiful thing he'd seen all night. "We're almost there," Bowman called out, a note of hope entering his voice for the first time since entering the hospital. Bowman kept his legs pumping, coming around the next corner and spotting a set of double doors that led to the cafeteria. They slammed shut right as he came around the corner, 2 people on the other side trying to secure it. He could see them through the small windows in the doors, a young man and woman working frantically to block the entrance. "Hey, keep that door open," Bowman shouted, waving his arms as he ran. Bowman and the others raced up to the door, the officer smacking his hand against the door forcefully as he got there. The metal surface rang with the impact, drawing the attention of those inside. He pressed his face close to the window, trying to make eye contact with those trying to barricade the entrance. He looked through the small window, spotting a terrified young man who was holding it shut. The kid couldn't have been more than 20, his youthful face contorted with fear as he braced himself against the door. "You need to let me in right now," Bowman demanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. The young man shook his head no, his fear overtaking him. His eyes were wide, darting between Bowman and something behind him. Self-preservation had overridden any sense of compassion. Bowman raised his shotgun, aiming it right at him. The barrel pressed against the glass, creating a small circle of pressure. The young man's eyes widened further, fixed on the weapon that now threatened him more immediately than the zombies. "You open it right now, or you're not going to have to worry about those things getting you," Bowman threatened, his patience evaporating. The young man nodded as he began moving stuff out of the way of the door. Bowman flinched as Price fired off a couple of shots down the hallway. He glanced back, spotting a few creatures coming around the corner. Bowman turned and fired a single shotgun shell, hitting a creature in the head, exploding it like an overripe melon hitting the pavement. Gore splashed across the wall behind it, a macabre painting created in an instant. The body crumpled, but more were coming behind it. The door clicked open, Bowman spinning around and plowing through it, yelling as he went. He nearly knocked over the young man who had unblocked it, pushing past him with desperate urgency. "Everybody in here now," he ordered, holding the door open for the others. Price grabbed onto the other two survivors that were left in their group, shoving them through the door while firing several more times with his handgun. The shots were precise despite the chaotic situation, years of range practice paying off when it mattered most. Once they were through, he stepped inside, Bowman slamming the door shut a few seconds before the zombies got to them. The creatures slammed against it immediately, their combined weight making the metal bend slightly inward. "Get those tables over here," Bowman shouted, pointing to the heavy cafeteria furniture. The terrified young man joined with the others, pushing the heavy table in front of the door, their faces strained with effort as they moved the solid piece of furniture, its legs screeching against the floor tiles. Once it was secure, Bowman took a step back, relieved to see it was holding. He grabbed onto the young man's shirt, pulling him close and speaking forcefully. "I need you to get 2 more tables against this door and babysit it. Do you understand?" Bowman instructed. The man nodded before running off and doing as he was told. Bowman turned around, stepping up beside Price, who was in a bit of shock. The younger officer stood with his weapon still drawn, staring at nothing particular as he processed what they'd just experienced. "Are you good, man?" Bowman asked, his tone softening slightly. "Yeah, I'm all right," Price replied unconvincingly, blinking hard as if trying to clear his vision. Price dropped his mag, slapping in a fresh one. The two of them looked around the cafeteria, which had a set of double doors on their right, which led towards the emergency room. People were barricading it as best they could, piling chairs and tables haphazardly against the entrance. Muffled screams and thumps could be heard even through the barricade. To their left was the kitchen, a couple of people rolling a table over to block that door too. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the fluorescent lights, industrial-sized cooking equipment standing silent and unused. The cafeteria itself was about half full, maybe 30 people scattered around the large room, most huddled in small groups, some tending to injured companions. "So, what do we do now?" Price asked, surveying the scene with growing concern. "That is an excellent question." Chapter 6. Officers Bowman and Price stood in the cafeteria, catching their breath and taking in the scene. The room buzzed with frantic activity, a microcosm of chaos within the larger disaster unfolding throughout the hospital. The alarm had stopped blaring, but the red emergency lights continued to pulse, casting an eerie glow across the frightened faces of the survivors. People continued to barricade the doors, shoving tables, chairs, and anything else they could find against the entrances. The scrape of metal chair legs against the linoleum floor created a discordant symphony of desperation. Others broke down in tears from the loss of loved ones, their sobs punctuating the tense atmosphere. A few of them were tending to injuries, including bites. Most were non-serious, but a few of them were on the upper torso near the neck. Bowman's eyes narrowed as he scanned those with bite wounds. The clock was ticking, and few in the room seemed to realize it. Bowman looked around, spotting a doctor and marching towards him. The doctor was kneeling down, busy treating a patient with a nasty bite wound on their leg. Blood seeped through a makeshift bandage as the doctor worked, his gloved hands moving with practiced precision, trying to patch it up. "Doctor, I need to talk to you now," Bowman demanded. "It's going to be a minute, officer, because if you can't tell, I'm a little busy here," Dr. Bryant replied without looking up from his patient. His voice carried the clipped tone of someone used to being obeyed in medical matters. The doctor was young, early 30s, and still had that arrogance to him. His lab coat was spattered with blood, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd been on shift long before the crisis began. Bowman didn't appreciate the dismissal, reaching down and grabbing the doctor by the arm and yanking him up to his feet. The sudden movement caused Bryant to drop the bandage he was holding. leaving it half secured on the patient's leg. "Just who in the hell do you think you are?" Bryant demanded, jerking his arm away from Bowman's grip, his face flushed with indignation, professional pride battling with the shock of being manhandled. "I'm the one trying to save everyone's life," Bowman replied, his voice low but intense. "By taking me away from patients," Bryant countered, gesturing toward the injured person on the floor. The patient stared up at them with wide, frightened eyes, clutching at the loosened bandage. Bowman looked at a nurse that was standing nearby, concern on her features at the sight of what he was doing to the doctor. She was younger than Bryant, probably fresh out of nursing school, and clearly uncertain about how to react to anything that was going on. "Nurse, work on that man. The doc and I need to have a chat," Bowman instructed, his tone leaving no room for debate. The nurse hesitated only briefly before nodding, grabbing a roll of gauze from a nearby table and dropping to her knees beside the patient. Her hands moved less confidently than the doctor's, but she set to work completing the bandaging. Bowman dragged the doctor halfway across the room before letting go, making sure they were away from everyone else. The cafeteria tables created a small island of privacy amid the crowded space, just enough distance that their conversation wouldn't be overheard if they kept their voices down. "You better have a damn good reason for doing this," Bryant said, straightening his lab coat with an irritated tug. "I need you to pull every person with a bite away from the others," Bowman stated bluntly, cutting straight to the point. "For what possible reason?" Bryant asked, eyebrows rising in disbelief. "Because I think that's what's causing the people to go crazy and start attacking others," Bowman explained. Bryant thought about it for a moment, shaking his head, not wanting to believe it, even if he had the thought himself. His medical training rebelled against the idea. Infections didn't work that way. People didn't transform into mindless attackers through a simple bite. Yet the evidence was mounting, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew Bowman might be right. "Even if that's true, what is separating them from everyone else going to do?" Bryant challenged, unwilling to concede the point entirely. "Or for one, it'll make it easier to blow their heads off if need be," Bowman replied grimly. Dr. Bryant became enraged, keeping his voice low but speaking with anger. His face flushed crimson, a vein throbbing visibly at his temple. "This is a healing hospital. Under no circumstances are you going to—" he began, outrage dripping from every word. Bowman stepped up, grabbing the doctor by the scrubs and shoving him backward several steps, nearly lifting him off the ground. For a moment, it looked as though he might actually throw the physician across the room, raw frustration giving his muscles extra power. "I'm going to do whatever I need to do in order to survive," Bowman growled. "Take your damn hands off me right now," Bryant demanded, struggling ineffectually against Bowman's grip. "If you want to survive, you're going to do what I tell you to," Bowman pressed, not releasing his hold. Under normal circumstances and a different tone, Bryant might have listened. However, he let his ego get in the way of good judgment. The standoff between officer and doctor became a silent battle of wills, neither man willing to yield. Before he could respond, someone called out from the far end of the room, their voice cracking with desperation. "Please, I need a doctor. My wife isn't responding," a man cried out. Bryant smacked Bowman's hand away from him, speaking forcefully as he backed up a step. "I'm going to go treat my patient, and if you so much as step in her direction, I'm going to have my security guard open fire on you." Bryant looked across the room, making eye contact with a scared security guard. The guard stood near the barricaded door, his hand resting nervously on his holstered weapon. Bryant pointed to the officers, getting a nod in response, though the guard's face showed his uncertainty. "Now get the hell out of my way," Bryant pushed past Bowman, running towards the patient in need. "Well, that didn't go as planned," Price commented, keeping his voice low. "No, it did not," Bowman agreed. "So what do we do now?" Price asked. Bowman looked over the room, the security guard going over to the doctor, staring him down as he moved. Bowman spotted several others who were in bad shape, the situation about to go critical. "We get the hell out of here," Bowman decided, his voice flat with resignation. "Are you kidding me?" Price replied, shock evident in his tone. The younger officer's face registered disbelief, his training and sense of duty clearly conflicting with Bowman's unexpected declaration. "If you want to stay and die, that's on you, but I plan on living through the night," Bowman stated bluntly. Bowman turned towards the kitchen area, walking towards it with purpose. His boots squeaked against the floor as he moved, each step deliberate and final. Price hesitated, but ultimately followed, even if he knew it was wrong. Bowman shoved the table out of the way, freeing access to the door. The metal legs screeched against the floor, drawing a few curious glances from nearby survivors. He pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen, looking around for the exit. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed under the fluorescent lights, industrial-sized equipment standing silent. Finally spotting the emergency exit near the back, he headed straight for it, weaving between prep stations and storage racks. Bowman strolled over to it, completely checked out of the situation at the hospital. The weight of the night had worn him down, survival instinct overwhelming his sense of duty. Price continued following, but kept looking back, his steps hesitant and uncertain. "This feels wrong, Bowman," Price said, stopping several paces behind his partner. Bowman stopped, looking back at Price, speaking forcefully. "We tried to help, and they didn't want it. As soon as that woman dies, the shit is going to hit the fan in there. I'm all about helping out, but I'm not getting shot at to help those who don't want help," Bowman declared, gesturing back toward the cafeteria. Price stood motionless as Bowman turned and kept moving to the emergency exit. His hand reached for the push bar, ready to escape the doomed hospital and whatever fate awaited those who remained behind. Before he could open the door, screams carried from the cafeteria, followed by a gunshot. Rather than quiet following, more screams continued along with people running. "We have to go now," Bowman shouted. Price went into contemplation for a brief moment before turning and running back towards the cafeteria. His face showed determination mixed with fear, something in him unable to abandon those people to their fate without at least trying to help. "Price!" Bowman yelled out, watching the younger officer push through the swinging door. Within seconds, Price began firing, the sharp report of his service weapon punctuating the screams. Bowman muttered curses under his breath before exiting the building. The heavy metal door slammed behind him with a finality that matched his decision. It took a moment for him to get his bearings, spotting his car 100 yards away to the right. Bowman took off running, looking in through the windows into the cafeteria as he passed. It was carnage. Zombies running around, gunshots popping off, blood splatter on the glass. He caught glimpses of people falling, of creatures that had once been patients tearing into those they had sat beside minutes earlier. A flash of movement might have been Price, firing into the melee, but Bowman couldn't be sure and didn't slow down to confirm. Bowman put it out of his mind, running hard towards the car. As he got halfway to it, he spotted zombies near the entrance of the emergency room, who locked onto him, their heads turned in unison, letting out an excited moan at the presence of a fresh meal. "Damn it," Bowman growled. Bowman picked up the pace, moving away from the building as the zombies began running after him. They moved with that frightening speed he had witnessed earlier, their limbs pumping with single-minded purpose. He managed to reach his car a few steps before they did, throwing open the door and diving in. He slammed the door shut just before they arrived. The first creature hit the side of the patrol car with enough force to rock it slightly, its face pressed against the window with a sickening smear of blood and saliva. Others joined it, surrounding the vehicle and pounding on the windows and hood with mindless persistence. Bowman sat there, listening to the zombies banging against the glass, hearing a few more gunshots go off inside the cafeteria before falling silent. The cessation of gunfire carried its own message. Price had either run out of ammunition or met a fate Bowman didn't want to contemplate. Bowman let out a scream, punching his steering wheel several times, his frustration at Price and the whole situation getting the better of him. The horn blared with each impact, adding to the cacophony of moans and thuds as the creatures continued their assault on the vehicle. For a moment, raw emotion overwhelmed him. Grief for his partner, anger at the doctor's stubbornness, guilt at his own decision to abandon those people. Chapter 7. Bowman sat in his patrol car with a 1,000-yard stare. The zombies outside continued banging on the windows trying to get in. their faces pressed against the glass, leaving smears of blood and saliva that distorted their already grotesque features. The dull, rhythmic thudding of their hands against the car had become almost hypnotic, blending into white noise as Bowman retreated into his thoughts. As he sat there, his cell phone rang. The sudden noise cut through his dissociative state, pulling him back to the present moment. He picked it up, seeing it was Jennifer calling, his ex-girlfriend. The sight of her name on the screen felt surreal, a fragment of normal life intruding on the nightmare. "Really, universe? You're bringing my ex into this day?" Bowman muttered, staring at the phone as it continued to ring. Bowman thought for a moment, wondering if he should answer. After a long sigh, he clicked answer, raising the phone to his ear. "This really isn't a good time, Jennifer," he said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "I know, but I need your help. We need your help," Jennifer replied, her voice tight with fear. In the background, he could hear what sounded like multiple people, some talking, others crying. "Call the main line and they'll send somebody else out," Bowman responded automatically. "We tried, and there's nobody home at the main line. We're trapped and we need help." The desperation in her voice was unmistakable, cutting through Bowman's emotional numbness. "I don't know what I'm going to be able to do," he admitted, watching as another creature joined those surrounding his car, drawn by the commotion. "Just please, do a drive-by, let us know if the parking lot is clear so we can make a run for our cars," Jennifer pleaded. Bowman contemplated for a moment before responding. "Be ready to move in 5 minutes, he finally decided, his cop voice returning. Bowman hung up the phone, tossing it into the center console as he started up the car. The engine rumbled to life, the familiar sound momentarily comforting. He let it idle for a moment before picking up the radio, his fingers hesitating over the transmit button. "Come in, dispatch, do you copy?" he called, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. There was a long silence, nothing but static coming through. The white noise seemed to mock him, a technological echo of the void where support should be. "Come on, dispatch, don't leave me hanging," he said, a note of pleading entering his voice. More silence. He shook his head in disbelief before putting the car into drive. The zombies pressed closer, sensing his imminent departure. Bowman peeled out from his spot, bouncing as he ran over a creature, leaving the rest in the rearview mirror as he headed back to the highway. He cut straight across to the beach side. As he crossed, he saw some carnage, a few wrecked cars and zombies running amok in the street. A minivan had slammed into a utility pole, its windshield spider-webbed with cracks but no driver visible. Nearby, a sedan lay on its roof, spinning wheels still turning lazily. A small group of creatures swarmed around it, drawn by someone inside. Bowman knew Jennifer's restaurant was attached to a pier a few miles to the south. He kept the lights and siren off, driving through the rows of vacation homes. The darkness between streetlights concealed whatever might be lurking in yards or side streets, and Bowman preferred it that way. It was mostly quiet, thanks to it being the end of season. A brief thought of how bad it would have been in the middle of summer appeared in his mind, which he quickly shook off. The island's population swelled 5-fold during peak tourist season, turning quiet streets into crowded thoroughfares. The current situation would have been unmanageable with those numbers. Bowman approached the parking lot of the pier restaurant, his mind completely disassociating from what he was doing. He could hear himself talking, but the shock of the evening was beginning to take its toll. His hands moved automatically, turning the wheel, adjusting speed, all while part of his consciousness floated somewhere above, observing with detached interest. Pulling into the lot. "I don't really see much of anything," he reported into the phone, scanning the dimly lit area. "So the paths to our cars are clear?" Jennifer's voice came through, hope evident in her tone. "I think it is, but you have to move," Bowman trailed off before yelling out, his detachment shattered by sudden movement in his peripheral vision. "Jesus Christ!" he shouted as several zombies emerged from the darkness, swarming his car, banging their hands on the glass. They appeared seemingly from nowhere, materializing from the shadows between parked cars, from behind dumpsters, from under the wooden walkway that led to the pier. He let out a deep sigh, his mind checking out of the conversation as he talked to his ex and her coworkers. The creatures pressed against his windows, their mouths working silently, leaving foggy patches on the glass that obscured their distorted features. His thoughts kept drifting back to Price, making what he believed to be his last stand at the hospital. The younger officer had made his choice, choosing duty over survival. Bowman couldn't decide if that made him heroic or foolish. Probably both. He continued through the motions, zoning out until Jennifer said, "Okay, Bowman, we're going to do it your way. Let us know when you're ready." Bowman shook his head, trying his best to fully snap into the moment, struggling to recall exactly what he was supposed to do. After several moments, he remembered something about leading the zombies away from the lot. It was a simple plan. Use his car as bait to draw the creatures away, giving Jennifer and the others a window to reach their vehicles. This was fine by him, as risking his life for his ex wasn't high up on his to-do list tonight. Once he was mentally ready, he spoke up again. "Hitting the sirens now. You wait until I tell you to move. Good luck," he instructed. "Thanks, Bowman," Jennifer replied. Bowman didn't respond to the gratitude from his ex-girlfriend. A moment later, he hit the lights and siren, pulling zombies out of the shadows towards him. The effect was immediate. Not just those already surrounding his car, but others hidden in dark corners of the lot began moving toward the noise and flashing lights, drawn like moths to flame. "Is it clear?" Jennifer's voice came through the phone, impatient. "I said I'd let you know," Bowman replied curtly, frustration edging into his tone. Bowman shook his head, frustrated as he backed out to the highway. He threw his car into gear, slamming on the gas and peeling off down the road, yelling into his phone. "Move now," he shouted. Bowman hung up, tossing the phone into the center console as he sped away, bringing a large collection of ghouls with him. His rearview mirror showed a dozen or more creatures following, their movements fast and determined. Not for the first time, he marveled at how quickly they moved for things that were supposedly dead. He got up several blocks before turning off the lights and siren, cutting the wheel sharply, making the turn onto a side street. He went up a block, pulling into a vacant house, parking underneath the carport and turning the engine off. The sudden silence was jarring after the wail of the siren. He sat still, barely breathing, as if the creatures might somehow hear him through the car's metal shell. Bowman sat in silence for several minutes, watching the road intently for zombies. He hoped he had gotten far enough ahead before turning that he wouldn't be followed. It took a few more minutes for him to confirm that he was alone. "Those things would have caught up to me by now," he reasoned, allowing himself to relax marginally. Bowman flinched as his phone rang again. Picking it up, he saw it was Jennifer. He stared at the device as it rang and rang, before hitting decline call. He didn't want to know if she'd made it or not. If she had, there was nothing more he could do for her. If she hadn't, he couldn't bear the weight of another failure tonight. "I wish you well, Jennifer, but I'm not helping you anymore," he said to the darkened car, a finality in his voice. Bowman looked at his radio, picking it up one more time, hoping that the dispatcher would answer. He was completely alone for the first time since the chaos had begun, and the isolation pressed in on him like a physical weight. He finally convinced himself to click it on. "Come on, dispatch, tell me that you're there," he called, straining to hear any response through the static. Nothing but silence followed. Bowman hoped that it was because the dispatcher had made a run for it, realizing how bad things were. In his heart, he knew that likely wasn't the case, but he forced himself to believe it. The alternative, that the dispatcher had met the same fate as those at the hospital, was too grim to contemplate. With no other real options, he began switching through all the channels, making the same call at each one before waiting for a response. His voice grew increasingly mechanical with each repetition, a robot going through the motions of protocol that no longer mattered. "This is Officer Bowman. Does anybody copy?" he called, over and over, channel after channel. This went on for what felt like an eternity before another voice carried over the line. The sound of another human voice, a familiar one at that, sent a jolt of electric relief through Bowman's system. "Yeah, Bowman, this is Newman. If you're in the area, I could use some backup," came the reply. "I'm about half a mile south of the Surfside Bar," Bowman responded quickly. "Thank Christ, you're not too far away." "I'm on Pelican, only house with the lights on. I could use some backup," Newman explained. "What's the situation?" Bowman asked. It's a domestic, but the husband is completely out of his mind. I got him in a back room, but I don't think I can cuff him myself, Newman reported. Bowman snapped into the moment, speaking with authority. I want you to stand down until I get there. I'll be there within minutes, he instructed, starting the car, shifting it into drive. Copy that, Newman acknowledged, the radio falling silent right after. Bowman hit the gas, peeling out of the driveway before finding a side street that went south. Chapter 8. Bowman sped down the side streets to the south, checking every street sign as he went. The residential neighborhoods were eerily quiet, most houses dark and shuttered for the off-season. The few that showed signs of life, a porch light here, a flickering television glow there, seemed oblivious to the horror unfolding across the island. Finally, after several minutes, he spotted Pelican Drive. The street sign gleamed briefly in his headlights, letting him know he had arrived. He made the turn towards the ocean, quickly seeing the only house with lights on. Every window blazed with illumination, as if the occupants were trying to warn ships off the coast that they were near land. He pulled into the driveway, parking right beside the other police cruiser. Bowman got out, looking around for movement, but thankfully seeing none. The gentle crash of waves against the shore provided a soundtrack that seemed incongruously peaceful. Within moments, however, he heard a commotion coming from inside the house above, followed by a woman screaming. The sound cut through the night air, reigniting Bowman's adrenaline. "Son of a bitch," Bowman muttered. Bowman pulled out his handgun, running for the ground floor entrance. The door was already open, allowing for easy access. He found the stairs and raced up them as the commotion above continued unabated. He could hear Newman barking orders to someone, trying to get the person to calm down. His voice strained with effort, words indistinct but tone unmistakable. "Get back. I said stay down." Newman's voice became clearer as Bowman ascended. As Bowman reached the top of the stairs, he spotted a middle-aged woman sitting in the kitchen, holding a towel against a wound on her arm. Her eyes were wide with terror, face pale beneath a sheen of sweat. Blood seeped through the cloth pressed to her forearm, the wound clearly deep. A loud crash drew his attention to the living room as Officer Newman and a zombified man struggled. The coffee table had been overturned, magazines and decorative items scattered across the floor. A lamp lay shattered nearby, its bulb still glowing weakly. Newman managed to get behind the creature, who thrashed about, biting at the air, trying to get close enough to get a taste of flesh. Bowman saw that the man was definitely a ghoul. The same vacant eyes, the same mindless aggression he'd witnessed at the restaurant and hospital. "Get away from him, Newman," Bowman shouted, raising his weapon. Newman didn't respond, instead continuing to struggle with the zombie. He managed to get both of the creature's arms pulled back before sweeping its legs and sending them both to the ground. Newman landed on top of the zombie, pinning it to the ground. His knee pressed into the small of its back as he fought to maintain control. Sweat poured down his face with the effort of restraining something that no longer felt pain or fatigue. Bowman grunted in frustration as he stepped up, aiming his handgun and firing a single round through the back of the zombie's skull. The shot was deafening in the confined space, the flash momentarily illuminating the room in stark white light. Dark fluid and matter splattered across the beige carpet, the creature's struggles ceasing instantly. "Jesus Christ, Bowman!" Officer Newman scrambled backwards, managing to get to his feet. His uniform was splashed with blood, his face a mask of shock and outrage. Newman drew his handgun, aiming it at Bowman, who continued staring down at the corpse on the ground. The younger officer's hands shook slightly, his training battling with the horror of what he'd just witnessed. "I'm going to need you to put your weapon on the ground, Bowman," Newman ordered, his voice strained with tension. Officer Bowman didn't respond to the command, simply holstering his handgun. His movements were deliberate, calm, the actions of a man who had already processed a reality that Newman was only beginning to confront. "I said," Newman began, his voice rising with the stress of the situation. Bowman cut his fellow officer off, his tone flat with exhaustion. "I heard what you said." Both of them were interrupted by the woman in the kitchen going into hysterics at the sight of her husband being killed in the living room. Her screams took on a new pitch, raw grief mixing with terror as she staggered towards the living room. Newman kept his weapon trained on Bowman as he moved past him and over to the wife. Bowman didn't move, just standing there and letting Newman process what just took place. "Don't worry, ma'am, you're safe. I'm not going to let him hurt you too," Newman assured the woman, though his eyes never left Bowman. "I didn't hurt him," Bowman stated simply, no emotion in his voice. "Bullshit. You just executed him," Newman shouted, his face flushing with anger. Bowman took a deep breath, fighting off the urge to fly off the handle. His patience had worn thin after the events of the night, but antagonizing the only other officer he'd managed to contact would be counterproductive. "Are you done?" he asked. "Hell no, I'm not done," Newman replied, his weapon still trained on Bowman's chest. Newman kept his weapon pointed at Bowman as he used his other hand to grab the radio on his belt. He clicked it on, the familiar crackle of static filling the tense silence. "Come in, dispatch, this is Officer Newman and I need backup," he called, desperation edging into his voice. "They're not going to answer," Bowman said flatly, knowing all too well the silence that awaited. "Just shut up," Newman snapped, pressing the transmit button again. Newman's frustration began to grow as he yelled into the radio again, his voice rising with each unanswered call. "Dispatch, I need backup." "I told you, there's nobody there," Bowman reiterated, his tone softer now, almost sympathetic. Newman began freaking out, beginning to believe what Bowman was saying. His eyes widened as the reality of their situation began to sink in. "There's something bad going on, Newman. I don't know all the details, but the way this asshole was acting, a lot of others are doing the same thing tonight," Bowman explained, gesturing toward the corpse on the floor. Newman was dismissive in his response, though doubt had begun creeping into his expression. "Oh yeah? What exactly are they doing?" "They're biting people, for one," Bowman replied, nodding towards the wife, whose face went white. Newman looked over to her, recalling watching the husband taking a bite out of her. "Go on," Newman prompted, his weapon lowering slightly. "I just came from the hospital. There's dozens of those things. It's a bloodbath, and it's all over the island," Bowman continued, speaking matter-of-factly, the images of the hospital cafeteria still fresh in his mind. "It's really all over the island?" Newman asked. "Yeah, I just ran into a couple dozen of them down at the Surfside bar. The main highway is a mess, dispatch is gone, and you're the only other officer I could reach on the radio," Bowman confirmed. Newman holstered his weapon before pacing back and forth. The wife looked at him incredulously, her panic giving way to outrage as she realized no one was going to be held accountable for her husband's death. "Why aren't you arresting him?" she demanded, her voice still shaky with emotion. Newman didn't respond, still contemplating what was happening. His brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to process everything Bowman had told him. "I said, why aren't you arresting him?" the woman repeated, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Because I think he might be right," Newman admitted, stopping his pacing to face her. "Are you kidding me? He murdered my husband," she cried, clutching the bloody towel to her arm. "Shortly after he bit you, right?" Bowman interjected, his eyes fixed on her wound. The wife looked at Bowman, fear in her eyes. She stammered for a moment, unable to respond. "That's what I thought," Bowman said softly, a hint of genuine sympathy breaking through his exhaustion. "Okay, so what do we do?" Newman asked, turning to face Bowman. "I'm still working that part out, but whatever we decide, it's just going to be the two of us," Bowman replied. Newman gave Bowman a confused look, glancing back at the woman in the kitchen. "If things are getting bad out there, we can't just leave her here." "Well, we are," Bowman stated firmly, his posture straightening. "Bowman, we can't," Newman protested, stepping closer to the woman protectively. Bowman drew his handgun, aiming it at the woman's head, prompting Newman to step in front of her. The sudden movement startled both Newman and the woman, who inhaled sharply. "She's been bitten. She's infected," Bowman explained, his voice calm despite the tension of the moment. "You're not shooting this woman," Newman declared, standing his ground. "Maybe, maybe not, but she's definitely not coming with us," Bowman stated firmly. Newman stared at Bowman, sensing that he's lost it. You know what, Bowman? I think I'm going to take her up to the station. It's probably just a comms error, nothing more, Newman decided, his voice taking on a placating tone. You really don't want to do that, Newman, Bowman warned. I'm thinking I do, Newman replied, his decision made. Newman made sure to stay right in front of the woman as he motioned towards the stairs. Bowman just watched, keeping the gun on them as they descended. The younger officer guided the woman with one hand on her shoulder, his other hovering near his holstered weapon. Newman gave him a disapproving look as he vanished behind the railing. Bowman called out before they left the house, a final warning that he knew would go unheeded. If you make it back to the station, make sure to lock her up. She's going to turn into one of those things. Bowman heard the words coming out of his mouth, letting out a sigh when he realized he wouldn't believe them if he was in Newman's shoes. The situation was beyond anything in their training, beyond anything in their experience. Newman was simply falling back on procedure, on the familiar comfort of departmental protocol. Good job, dumbass. There went the only help you had, Bowman muttered to himself, holstering his weapon. Bowman walked over to the patio door, looking down into the driveway, watching Newman load up the woman into his car and driving off. The taillights receded into the darkness, leaving Bowman truly alone once more. So what in the hell do you do now? He asked aloud, running a hand through his hair. Bowman looked around the house, hoping for some inspiration. His gaze drifted over family photos, vacation souvenirs, the ordinary trappings of a life that had been shattered in moments. Finally, his gaze fell on a large oil painting of the island's map. He stepped over, inspecting it closely. He found where he was, on the southern end of Bodie Island, tracing his line across the bridge to the south towards Hatteras Island. He smirked as the idea hit him. Bowman, you're a genius. There's not too many people down there, especially this time of year. It'll be safer, and if you get a few of the good old boys down there, you just might be able to clear it out, he said to himself. Bowman thought about it for a moment, as if he was trying to figure out how that would help him long term. His focus then fell onto the bridge between the islands. He tapped it with his finger, smiling as the strategic potential became clear. You can block that bridge off. That could work, he mused, his tactical mind already working through the logistics. Bowman racked his brain, trying to come up with any idea that would be better, but nothing came. Okay, next stop, Hatteras. Chapter 9. Officer Bowman pulled out onto the highway, just north of the bridge over to Roanoke Island. The crisp night air flooded through his open window, carrying the salt scent of the sea. He looked back to the main portion of Bodie Island, wrecked cars dotting the area. A few zombies ran about on the road, but not in overwhelming number, yet. They moved with that unnerving speed Bowman had witnessed throughout the night, their forms little more than shadows against the darker backdrop of the island. Get your ass moving, Bowman muttered to himself, a self-directed command to break the momentary trance. Bowman motivated himself, hitting the gas and picking up speed. The patrol car's engine responded with a reassuring growl, the vehicle lurching forward as the speedometer needle climbed. He raced down several miles before passing a strip mall on his left. Bowman slowed down, spotting pure carnage. Dozens of zombies were pressed up against the stores, trying to get inside. Their bodies formed a writhing mass against the glass storefronts, fists and faces leaving bloody smears on the transparent barriers. Several cars sat in the parking lot with nobody inside, abandoned in haste as their owners fled for safety. The officer's first instinct was to stop and help, but he knew it wouldn't do any good. He was hopelessly outmanned. Even with the shotgun and his sidearm, he couldn't take on that many creatures. Secure the other island, get a foothold, then you can come back and help, Bowman reasoned aloud, giving voice to the strategy forming in his mind. Bowman looked over, shaking his head, still talking to himself. The habit had developed over the course of the evening, a way to combat the isolation, to hear something besides the moans of the creatures or their hands smacking against his car. Just keep moving. Hopefully those people are smart enough to stay put. The officer continued driving south, keeping his focus on the road ahead, which was clear. His headlights carved a path through the darkness, illuminating the two-lane highway that served as the island's main artery. The patrol car's tires hummed against the asphalt, a rhythmic sound that helped settle his nerves. It took several minutes of driving before reaching the bridge over the inlet. The moonlight was bright, reflecting on the ocean and bay. Silver light danced across the water's surface, creating a scene of unexpected beauty amid the horror of the night. Bowman slowed down, appreciating the beauty, even spotting a couple of boats heading out to sea. Their running lights cut small paths across the dark water, distant humans who had possibly found the safest escape route. "Now there's a good idea. I doubt these things can swim," he remarked, mentally filing away the thought for future consideration. Bowman continued driving for several minutes, eventually spotting the sign for Avon. It was a small community, just under 1,000 people, with numerous stores that catered more to locals than the tourists. During peak season, it served as a way station for those headed further south to the lighthouse, but this time of year it was primarily home to year-round residents. Bowman tensed up, scanning the darkened area, expecting zombies, but only spotting a few running in between the houses. Their movements were purposeful, hunting, though what prey remained was unclear. The relative scarcity was encouraging, however. The officer swerved as one creature darted into the road. The zombie's aim was off, missing the front of the car but bouncing off the side of it with enough force to dent the side panel. The impact rocked the vehicle slightly, metal groaning in protest. Bowman accelerated, looking in the rearview mirror as the creature scrambled back to its feet. It stood in the middle of the road, staring after the retreating vehicle for a moment before giving chase, though it quickly fell behind. "I should probably get off the highway," Bowman muttered. Bowman made the next left turn, getting off the main road and onto the side roads. He went 2 blocks before turning to the south. The residential streets were quieter, with fewer cars and no obvious signs of the creatures. There were a handful of houses mixed with small businesses, most of them dark. A block ahead, however, sat a small restaurant, the lights still on. It was a simple place, the kind of diner that probably served the same specials it had for decades. Bowman pulled up, spotting a few cars in the parking lot, but his attention was pulled to the giant window in the front of the building. Inside, a battle raged. Tables were overturned, the front door window was broken, and one man used a stool as a makeshift weapon. The man was in his late 20s, clearly in shape as he swung the stool with force. His movements were practiced and efficient, suggesting military training, or at least significant physical conditioning. The first swing caught a zombie in the shoulder, sending it tumbling over a table. The man recovered quickly, swinging it the other way, knocking over another creature. His attention turned to a zombie right in front of him, using the stool as a battering ram. The wooden legs of the stool cracked with the impact, but held together for one more attack. He drove the creature back, shoving it at the last second, sending it careening through the window, shattering it. The ghoul landed hard on the ground, shards of glass ripping its flesh. The crash echoed in the quiet street, tiny fragments of glass twinkling in the moonlight as they scattered across the pavement. The man leapt from the window, landing on the parking lot, stumbling forward. Bowman clicked his lights on briefly, getting his attention. The man's head whipped around, his body instantly tensing for another confrontation, before recognizing the patrol car. Bowman pulled the car into the lot, spinning it around so that the passenger side was to the man. Bowman rolled down the window, yelling out, "Get in!" he ordered. The man didn't wait to be asked twice, throwing open the door and leaping in. Before the door shut, Bowman hit the gas, peeling out from the parking lot. The tires squealed against the asphalt, leaving black marks as the car accelerated away from the diner. Bowman sped back to the north, cutting over a block before finding another quiet house to park under. He backed in, cutting the engine, making sure nothing was following. The sudden silence was almost jarring after the adrenaline-fueled escape, broken only by their heavy breathing. "Are you all right?" Bowman asked, giving the man a quick once-over for visible injuries. "Yeah, I'm good," Jackson replied, still catching his breath. His clothes were disheveled and spotted with blood, but he appeared uninjured. "You're not bitten, are you?" Bowman pressed, hand hovering near his holstered weapon. He'd seen enough tonight to know what happened to bite victims. "No, those things didn't get close enough to try," Jackson assured him. "Good. I'm Bowman," the officer introduced himself, extending his hand in a gesture of normalcy that felt almost absurd under the circumstances. "Jackson," the man replied, accepting the handshake. "So what happened back there, Jackson?" Bowman asked, nodding back toward the diner. "I went to pick up some takeout. The next thing I know, someone's getting their throat ripped out. It kind of spiraled out of control after that," Jackson explained, his matter-of-fact tone belying the horror of what he'd witnessed. "Anybody else alive in there?" Bowman inquired. "I don't know, maybe," Jackson replied with a shrug, uncertainty evident in his voice. "Are they safe?" Bowman pressed, though he already suspected the answer. "Again, I don't know. A few people ran to the back, but I didn't get there and they didn't wait for me. So they're not really high up on my list of favorite people," Jackson said, a hint of bitterness in his tone. "That's understandable," Bowman replied. "So what about you? Unless I'm mistaken, this isn't your usual beat," Jackson observed, gesturing to the patrol car's markings that clearly identified it as belonging to the northern part of the islands. Bowman chuckled, nodding in agreement. "Yeah, I came down from Bodie. It's like what you dealt with back there, only about 100 times worse." "Well, ain't that fun?" Jackson remarked, his deadpan delivery drawing a thin smile from Bowman. "Not the word I'd use," Bowman replied. "So, what are we supposed to do? I mean, is help coming or what?" Jackson asked. "I haven't heard anything, but with the way things are going, I'm starting to think we might be on our own," Bowman admitted, the reality of their situation settling heavily between them. "Jesus Christ, is this happening everywhere?" Jackson wondered, the implications of a wider spread outbreak clearly dawning on him. "No clue, but if it is, it's going to be a long time before help comes. So I'd rather plan for the worst and hope for the best," Bowman replied. "So you have a plan then?" Jackson asked, a hint of hope entering his voice for the first time. "I want to clear the island and block off the bridge to Bodie," Bowman stated. Jackson stared at the officer for a moment, shaking his head. The audacity of the plan, or perhaps its desperation, struck him as simultaneously admirable and foolish. "Homecop, clearing an island. It's not much of a plan," Jackson pointed out, his expression skeptical. "Well, there are two of us now," Bowman countered, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The words hung in the air for a moment before both of them broke into laughter at the absurdity. The release of tension was brief, but necessary. "I don't suppose you have any friends who could help out?" Bowman asked once their laughter subsided. "Yeah, my buddies Nathan and Brandon would be up for a fight," Jackson replied thoughtfully. Jackson pulled out his cell, pulling up their numbers. The screen's glow illuminated his face in the darkened car, highlighting the determination in his eyes. "I'll tell them to bring the truck and meet me at my place," he said, already formulating a plan of his own. "Where's that?" Bowman inquired. "Down in Buxton. You know how to get there?" Jackson asked, glancing up from his phone. "Yep, just drive south. Kinda hard to screw it up since there's only one road," Bowman replied with a hint of humor. Jackson laughed a bit as he hit dial. Bowman started the car up, pulling out from the house and driving south. After a few rings, the phone answered. "Hey, Nathan, I need you and Brandon to bring the truck over to my place, and bring your rifles." Chapter 10. Bowman drove south towards Buxton, speeding down the empty highway. The headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, illuminating the two-lane road that stretched ahead like a ribbon through the narrow island. Outside their small cone of light, the world had disappeared into shadow. The ocean to their left, the sound to their right, both invisible but present in the rhythmic crash of waves carried on the night breeze. Both men had remained silent for several minutes before Jackson spoke up, breaking the tense quiet that had settled between them. "So do you have a plan for this? I mean, other than just kill them all?" Jackson asked. "I mean, that is a solid plan," Bowman replied, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Bowman knew the details were lacking, but he'd been making everything up as he had gone along tonight, so why would he change now? "Unless you have an army that's hiding in your trunk, I think we're going to need something a little more substantial," Jackson said. Jackson's quip sparked an idea in Bowman's mind, a flash of inspiration that lit up his tired features. He sat up straighter, his hands tightening on the steering wheel as the seed of a plan began to take root. "That's a good idea, Jackson. Damn good idea," Bowman said, his voice taking on new energy. "What is?" Jackson asked. "Raising an army." "I assume you have more than 2 friends," Bowman replied. "Not really, but I know who does," Jackson said. "Who's that?" Bowman pressed. "Skeet. He runs the bait and tackle shop down in Frisco," Jackson said. "Hopefully his friends are hunters because we're going to need more than rods and reels to clear the island," Bowman remarked. "Don't worry, he has a small gun section too. It's not like the gun shop up on Bodie, but it should be enough to get the job done, assuming we can find a spot to fight from," Jackson assured him. Bowman thought for a moment, picturing the encounters he'd had tonight, realizing that not a single creature had tried to climb. The zombies at the hospital had pounded against doors and windows, the ones at the restaurant had thrown themselves against obstacles, but none had shown the intelligence or coordination to do anything but run straight ahead. "The trucks. We're going to fight them from the trucks," Bowman said. Jackson looked over at Bowman like he was crazy, his expression a mixture of disbelief and reluctant interest. The dim glow from the dashboard illuminated his skeptical features. "Trucks, huh? That doesn't sound dangerous at all. So what, we're just going to stand out in the open?" he questioned. "Yep, we are," Bowman said. Bowman was confident. Jackson less so. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional rattle from the patrol car's aging suspension. After a long pause, Bowman continued, explaining his rationale. "Those things aren't that bright. They lock onto a target and run right at it. I haven't seen a single one trying to climb over anything or even run around a table. It's just straight ahead with no thought," he elaborated. Jackson contemplated it for a moment before nodding, conceding the point. He pointed to a road on the left, Bowman making the turn. The patrol car's tires crunched on the less maintained side road, which led deeper into a residential area. "So we pull up in the trucks, lay on the horn, and they come to us?" Jackson asked. "That's the theory, at any rate," Bowman acknowledged, aware of how flimsy it sounded when stated aloud. "I'm sure my boys are going to be thrilled at the plan," Jackson remarked with a dry chuckle. "Speaking of," Bowman replied. Bowman spotted 2 men sitting in the back of a pickup truck that was parked outside of a smaller house. The men were silhouetted against the dim porch light, their postures tense as they watched the approaching patrol car. Both of them looked concerned at the sight of a police car, their bodies visibly stiffening. They relaxed when they spotted Jackson waving from inside, though confusion remained evident in their body language. Both of them were in their early 30s, not in the great shape Jackson was in, merely average. The first wore a hunting cap pulled low over his eyes, while the second had a scruffy beard that hadn't seen proper grooming in weeks. Both of them held hunting rifles, resting across their laps with casual familiarity born of experience. Bowman parked beside them, both men jumping out of the police car. The gravel driveway crunched under their boots as they approached the pickup, its engine still idling as if the men had been prepared for a quick departure. "When did you make friends with the Popo?" Brandon asked, eyeing Bowman with undisguised suspicion. "About 30 minutes ago when he saved my ass," Jackson replied with a dismissive wave. "What's going on, man?" Nathan asked. "Yeah. Why are we out here in the middle of the night?" Brandon asked, shifting his rifle slightly. "You haven't noticed the world collapsing around you," Bowman interjected. Both men looked around, not seeing anything but a quiet, dark neighborhood. Their expressions made it clear they thought Bowman might be overreacting, or possibly unhinged. The peaceful street, with its modest homes and darkened windows, showed no signs of the horror Bowman had described. "Is your new friend feeling all right, Jackson?" Nathan asked. "As good as I can be," Bowman replied before Jackson could speak. "Look, there's some horror movie shit going on. He needs our help and we're going to give it to him," Jackson stated firmly, his posture making it clear this wasn't up for debate. Nathan and Brandon exchanged glances, not used to their friend talking like that. He was clearly the leader of their friend group, so they nodded, though uncertainty lingered in their expressions. Years of friendship and trust outweighed their doubts, at least for now. "Yeah, man, just tell us what we need to do," Nathan replied. "First off, We gotta get down to Skeet's place, Jackson explained. He closed hours ago, Brandon said, checking his watch out of habit despite the darkness. Yeah, but he's got a little apartment in the back of the store, even though he's not supposed to, Jackson said. Both men looked over to Bowman, shocked that Jackson would reveal that information about Skeet to a police officer. Bowman shook his head, shrugging with visible disinterest. Do you really think I care about a code violation right now? Bowman asked incredulously. So, what do we do? Nathan asked, his rifle now held more purposefully. Keep your rifles handy, and when the crazies come running at you, aim for the head. Now keep up, I'm driving fast, Bowman instructed. Bowman jumped back behind the wheel, not giving the two men time to really process what he'd just said. They looked to their friend Jackson, who just nodded before getting back into the passenger seat. The exchange of glances carried a wealth of unspoken communication. Trust Jackson. Go along with this, questions later. The pickup's headlights flashed on as they started the engine, pulling in behind Bowman's patrol car as he led the way back to the main highway. The two vehicles accelerated through the quiet neighborhood, their engines disrupting the night silence. Bowman sped down the highway, getting towards Frisco, which was the next community on the island. It was somehow smaller than Buxton, which was smaller than Avon. The settlements on Hatteras grew progressively smaller as one traveled south, the island itself narrowing toward its tip. It only took a few minutes for them to get there, Bowman spotting Skeet's gun shop in the distance. The modest building sat back from the road, illuminated against the night sky. A painted wooden sign reading Skeet's Bait, Tackle and Guns hung above the entrance, swinging slightly in the coastal breeze. The floodlights on the front of the building were at full power, bathing the darkness with light. A handful of zombies were in the lot, pressed up against the building. They pounded mindlessly against the walls and windows, drawn perhaps by some sense that living beings sheltered inside. Jesus, Jackson muttered. You sit tight while we deal with this, Bowman instructed. Jackson didn't argue as Bowman sped up, pulling into the parking lot. He slammed on brakes, the tires skidding on the pavement, drawing the attention of the handful of zombies by the front door. The creatures' heads turned in unison, vacant eyes fixing on the new arrival with predatory focus. Bowman threw open the door, popping out and aiming his handgun towards the creatures as they raced towards him. He popped off a couple of rounds, hitting the head of the first zombie and dropping it. The body crumpled mid-stride, collapsing in a heap on the asphalt. He took aim at the next one, but before he pulled the trigger, its head exploded from a rifle round fired by Nathan. A moment later, Brandon joined in, firing and taking one down. The crack of the rifles echoed across the parking lot, unnaturally loud in the quiet night. The trio fired a handful more bullets, taking down every creature in the front of the store. They sat there for a moment, quiet, making sure the noise hadn't drawn any more attention. The parking lot fell silent again, save for the ticking of cooling engines and the distant crash of waves. Bowman turned back to the truck, barking orders with enough authority to get the two men to obey without thinking about it. You two, stay out here and make sure we're alone. Jackson, you're with me, he commanded. Jackson jumped out of the car, the two of them marching up to the front door of the store. Bowman smacked his hand on the door multiple times, the sharp report echoing inside the darkened shop. It took a few moments before a voice yelled out from inside, gruff and unwelcoming. We're closed, the voice called. Not anymore, you're not. Open up, Bowman replied. Go to hell, came the immediate response, defiant and unyielding. Skeet, it's Jackson. Open up, man, we got a situation, Jackson interjected, stepping closer to the door. There was a long pause, muttering coming from the other side of the door as the locks were undone. The metallic sounds of multiple bolts being withdrawn suggested Skeet had taken serious precautions to secure his shop. A moment later, it opened, revealing a salty 60-year-old man, Skeet. His weathered face bore the marks of decades spent in the coastal sun, deep creases around eyes that had squinted against the glare off the water for most of his life. What kind of situation? Skeet demanded, his gaze darting between the two men. The kind that requires a lot of bullets, Bowman replied grimly. Bowman motioned back towards the parking lot where the corpses of the zombies were. Skeet's eyes got large when he saw it, his grip on the door tightening until his knuckles whitened. For a moment, he seemed ready to slam it shut again, but something in Bowman's expression gave him pause. "All right then, officer, what can I do for you?" Skeet asked, stepping back to allow them entry. "Get every friend you got over here, especially if they have a truck. Tell them to bring their guns if they got them," Bowman instructed. The interior smelled of fishing bait, gun oil, and the distinctive salt-tinged mustiness of old tackle. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with fishing gear, boating supplies, and a modest selection of firearms behind a glass counter. "And then what are we going to do?" Skeet questioned. "We're going on the hunt." Chapter 11. Hours passed as more and more trucks pulled up to Skeet's shop. The parking lot had transformed from a quiet commercial space to a makeshift military staging area. Headlights illuminated the darkened storefront, trucks arranged in a loose semicircle, their beds filled with men holding rifles and shotguns. Bowman stood by the back counter, along with Skeet, Jackson, Brandon, and Nathan. None of them had slept, their eyes showing the strain of a night that had stretched beyond reasonable limits. A map of the islands was pinned up on the wall, and several piles of guns and ammo were spread out into multiple piles. Each group had a radio assigned to them as well, communication being essential to their improvised operation. Bowman looked at his watch, seeing that it was a couple hours before the sun was going to be coming up. The night had seemed endless, but dawn would bring its own challenges. Visibility would improve, but so would the ability of the creatures to spot potential prey. "Okay, we can't wait any longer. Let's get this show on the road," Bowman said. "I'll get the boys in here," Skeet offered, already moving toward the door. "It's a little crowded. Just get me one from each truck," Bowman instructed. Skeet nodded and walked to the door, looking into the parking lot. There were half a dozen trucks with 15 men standing in the beds. Most of them were making small talk, smoking, and just enjoying the night, a veneer of normalcy masking the tension that hung in the air. A few of them were keeping watch, their hunting rifles at the ready. They scanned the darkness beyond the lot's lights, alert for any movement that might signal an approaching threat. These men had hunted deer and wild boar, but tonight they stalked different prey. "Give me one from each truck. Need you inside," Skeet called out, his gruff voice carrying clearly in the night air. The men in the parking lot nodded, 6 of them walking towards the building. They followed Skeet over to the counter, where Bowman stood ready, like he was about to give a presentation. His posture was military, straight, shoulders squared, eyes alert, despite the exhaustion that must have weighed on him. "All right, here you go, officer," Skeet said, gesturing to the assembled men. "Thanks, Skeet. All right, everybody get in tight. I'll make this quick," Bowman instructed, motioning them closer. The men did as instructed, pushing in so that they could hear and see the map. They were a diverse group: fishermen, shopkeepers, construction workers, united by their connection to the island and their willingness to defend it. Most wore the same weathered look that came from years living by the sea, skin-tanned and creased from sun and salt. "I'm not going to lie, it's a shit show out there, and by the time the sun comes up, it's going to be a lot worse. We have an opportunity right now to secure the island, and that's what we're going to do," Bowman stated. "These things we're fighting aren't that bright, and we're going to use that. I'm going to give each team a quadrant in Avon to clear. When you get there, I want you to find an open area, lay on the horn, and take down every single thing that comes your way," Bowman continued. "Just like that? What if we shoot at the wrong person?" one man asked. "Trust me, you won't mistake a living person for whatever these things are. They move fast, like a rabid dog after snorting a line of coke. They look tough, but one shot to the head will put them down," Bowman explained, his description vivid enough to paint a clear picture. The men looked around at each other, as if they weren't fully buying what Bowman was selling. He could see the doubt in their eyes, the reluctance to fully commit to fighting something they couldn't quite believe in. Jackson spoke up, as some of the men knew him. His local connection lent credibility to Bowman's outlandish claims. "I know how it sounds, and I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't dealt with it firsthand. A few of those things nearly took me down at the diner." "There's no helping them, and they need to be put down," Jackson affirmed. "Okay, if you say so, Jackson. But then what are we supposed to do?" another man asked. "Once we get Avon pacified, Jackson and his team are going to help me block off the bridge to Bodie. While we do that, you guys will keep moving south, clearing the island. Don't worry about the houses yet, only focus on the ones that are out in the streets." Bowman elaborated, his finger moving along the map to illustrate their path. The men weren't entirely convinced. However, a few of them nodded as if they were beginning to buy into the plan. "Just trust me, fellas. When you get a close-up look at what these things are, you're going to want to keep the tourists out," Bowman added. There was some grumbling amongst the men before Skeet took control of the meeting. As a longtime resident and business owner, his word carried weight, and he used it now to spur them to action. "All right, boys, we're burning moonlight. I got each of you a load out, so grab it, find your quadrant, and get moving," Skeet directed, his tone brooking no argument. The men followed Skeet's instructions as Bowman, Nathan, Brandon, and Jackson moved outside. Each team leader collected their assigned weapons and ammunition, nodding grimly as they headed back to their vehicles. Bowman and his group walked over to the patrol car and truck. The night air had cooled considerably, carrying the salt scent of the ocean and the faint foreboding of dawn still hours away. "We're the northernmost quadrant, so let's get moving," Bowman instructed, slinging an assault rifle over his shoulder. "You're riding with us?" Nathan asked, gesturing to their truck. "No, I'm following in my car," Bowman replied. "Everybody's got a radio, so I'm going to be calling out what I see as I move around the island," he added, tapping the unit attached to his belt. "Never hurts to have a scout," Jackson agreed, his confidence in Bowman's plan evident in his posture. Bowman nodded as he got into his patrol car, the three friends jumping into their truck. A moment later, they peeled out, speeding back up to the north. The truck's headlights carved a path through the darkness, the patrol cars following close behind. It took several minutes to reach Avon, which was beginning to deteriorate. Zombies were out in force, running around. Some appeared to be hunting, others wandered aimlessly. Bowman honked his horn as they went, pulling a number of them in their direction. The sound cut through the night, drawing immediate attention from the creatures. They turned as one, abandoning whatever had previously occupied them to race toward the noise. As they reached the northern part of town, the truck pulled over into a parking lot. Jackson and Brandon jumped out, getting into the bed, weapons at the ready. They smacked the roof, getting Nathan to hit the horn. Bowman pulled over to the side of the road, being quiet. The horn noise from the truck pulled the zombies in that direction, the creatures sprinting the 50 yards towards the exposed men. "Come on, be right. Be right about this," Bowman whispered to himself, watching the scene unfold ahead. Bowman watched with bated breath as the zombies raced towards the truck. Much to his relief, they acted as he expected, smacking into the side of the vehicle, none of them trying to climb. They pounded against the metal with mindless determination, reaching up toward the men in the bed, but making no attempt to scale the sides. Jackson and Brandon carefully aimed their weapons, shooting the zombies at point-blank range in the head. One by one, the creatures dropped to the ground, lifeless. The shots echoed in the empty streets, the sounds carrying far in the still night air. With each fallen creature, the men seemed to gain confidence, their movements becoming more assured, more methodical. Bowman began nodding to himself confidently, for the first time all night, real hope entering him. They had a fighting chance. This is going to work. This is actually going to work. The end.